The Beginning of Armadillos by Rudyard Kipling. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Samantha Miles. This, O best beloved, is another story of the high and far-off times. In the very middle of those times was a stickly, prickly hedgehog, and he lived on the banks of the turbid Amazon, eating shelly snails and things. And he had a friend, a slow, solid tortoise, who lived on the banks of the turbid Amazon, eating green lettuces and things. And so that was all right, best beloved. Do you see? But also, and at the same time, in those high and far-off times, there was a painted jaguar, and he lived on the banks of the turbid Amazon too, and he ate everything that he could catch. When he could not catch deer or monkeys, he would eat frogs and beetles, and when he could not catch frogs and beetles, he went to his mother jaguar, and she told him how to eat hedgehogs and tortoises. She said to him ever so many times, graciously waving her tail, "My son, when you find a hedgehog, you must drop him into the water, and then he will uncoil. And when you catch a tortoise, you must scoop him out of his shell with your paw." And so that was all right, best beloved. One beautiful night on the banks of the turbid Amazon, painted jaguar found stickly, prickly hedgehog and slow, solid tortoise sitting under the trunk of a fallen tree. They could not run away, and so stickly, prickly curled himself up into a ball, because he was a hedgehog, and slow, solid tortoise drew in his head and feet into his shell as far as they would go, because he was a tortoise, and so that was all right, best beloved. Do you see? "Now attend to me," said Painted Jaguar, "because this is very important. My mother said that when I meet a hedgehog, I am to drop him into the water, and then he will uncoil. And when I meet a tortoise, I am to scoop him out of his shell with my paw. Now, which of you is hedgehog and which is tortoise? Because, to save my spots, I can't tell." "Are you sure of what your mummy told you?" said Stickly Prickly Hedgehog. "Are you quite sure? Perhaps she said that when you uncoil a tortoise, you must shell him out of the water with a scoop, and when you paw a hedgehog, you must drop him on the shell." "Are you sure of what your mummy told you?" said Slow and Solid Tortoise. "Are you quite sure? Perhaps she said that when you water a hedgehog, you must drop him into your paw, and when you meet a tortoise, you must shell him till he uncoils." "I don't think it was at all like that," said Painted Jaguar, but he felt a little puzzled. "But please, say it again, more distinctly." "When you scoop water with your paw, you uncoil it with a hedgehog," said Stickly Prickly. "Remember that, because it's important." "But," said the tortoise, "when you paw your meat, you drop it into a tortoise with a scoop. Why can't you understand?" "You are making my spots ache," said Painted Jaguar. "And besides, I didn't want your advice at all. I only wanted to know which of you is hedgehog and which is tortoise." "I shan't tell you," said Stickly Prickly. "But you can scoop me out of my shell if you like." "Aha!" said Painted Jaguar. "Now I know you're tortoise. You thought I wouldn't. Now I will." Painted Jaguar darted out his paddy paw just as Stickly Prickly curled himself up, and of course Jaguar's paddy paw was just filled with prickles. Worse than that, he knocked Stickly Prickly away and away into the woods and the bushes, where it was too dark to find him. Then he put his paddy paw into his mouth, and of course the prickles hurt him worse than ever. As soon as he could speak, he said, "Now I know he isn't tortoise at all, but—" and then he scratched his head with his own prickly paw. "How do I know that this other is tortoise?" "But I am tortoise," said Slow and Solid. "Your mother was quite right. She said that you were to scoop me out of my shell with your paw. Begin." "You didn't say she said that a minute ago," said Painted Jaguar, sucking the prickles out of his paddy paw. "You said she said something quite different." "Well, suppose you say that I said that she said something quite different. I don't see that it makes any difference, because if she said what you said I said she said, it's just the same as if I said what she said she said. On the other hand, if you think she said that you were to uncoil me with a scoop, instead of pawing me into drops with a shell. I can't help that, can I? But you said you wanted to be scooped out of your shell with my paw, said Painted Jaguar. If you'll think again, you'll find that I didn't say anything of the kind. I said that your mother said that you were to scoop me out of my shell, said Slow and Solid. What will happen if I do? Said the Jaguar, most sniffily and most cautious. I don't know, because I've never been scooped out of my shell before, but I tell you truly, if you want to see me swim away, you've only got to drop me into the water. I don't believe it, said Painted Jaguar. You've mixed up all the things my mother told me to do with the things that you asked me whether I was sure that she didn't say, till I don't know whether I'm on my head or my painted tail. And now you come and tell me something I can understand, and it makes me more mixy than before. My mother told me that I was to drop one of you two into the water, and as you seem so anxious to be dropped, I think you don't want to be dropped. So jump into the turbid Amazon and be quick about it. I warn you that your mummy won't be pleased. Don't tell her I didn't tell you, said Slow Solid. If you say another word about what my mother said, the Jaguar answered, but he had not finished the sentence before Slow and Solid quietly dived into the turbid Amazon, swam under water for a long way, and came out on the bank where Stickly Prickly was waiting for him. That was a very narrow escape, said Stickly Prickly. I don't rib Painted Jaguar. What did you tell him that you were? I told him truthfully that I was a truthful tortoise, but he wouldn't believe it, and he made me jump into the river to see if I was, and I was, and he is surprised. Now he's gone to tell his mummy. Listen to him. They could hear Painted Jaguar roaring up and down among the trees and the bushes by the side of the turbid Amazon, till his mummy came. Son, son, said his mother, ever so many times, graciously waving her tail. What have you been doing that you shouldn't have done? I tried to scoop something that said it wanted to be scooped out of its shell with my paw, and my paw is full of prickles, said Painted Jaguar. Son, son, said his mother, ever so many times, graciously waving her tail. By the prickles in your paddy paw I see that that must have been a hedgehog. You should have dropped him into the water. I did that to the other thing, and he said he was a tortoise, and I didn't believe him, and it was quite true. He has dived under the turbid Amazon, and he won't come up again, and I haven't anything at all to eat, and I think we had better find lodgings somewhere else. They are too clever on the turbid Amazon for poor me. Son, son, said his mother ever so many times, graciously waving her tail. Now attend to me and remember what I say. A hedgehog curls himself up into a ball, and his prickles stick out every which way at once. By this you may know the hedgehog. I don't like this old lady one little bit, said Stickly Prickly, under the shadow of a large leaf. I wonder what else she knows. A tortoise can't curl himself up, Mother Jaguar went on, ever so many times, graciously waving her tail. He only draws his head and legs into his shell. By this you may know the tortoise. I don't like this old lady at all, said Slow and Solid Tortoise. Even Painted Jaguar can't forget those directions. It's a great pity that you can't swim, Stickly Prickly. Don't talk to me, said Stickly Prickly. Just think how much better it would be if you could curl up. This is a mess. Listen to Painted Jaguar. Painted Jaguar was sitting on the banks of the turbid Amazon, sucking prickles out of his paws, and saying to himself, Can't curl but can swim, Slow Solid, that's him. Curls up but can't swim, Stickly Prickly, that's him. He'll never forget that this month of Sundays, said Stickly Prickly. Hold up my chin, Slow and Solid. I'm going to try to learn to swim. It may be useful. Excellent, said Slow and Solid, and he held up Stickly Prickly's chin, while Stickly Prickly kicked in the waters of the turbid Amazon. You'll make a fine swimmer yet, said Slow and Solid. Now, if you can unlace my back plates a little, I'll see what I can do towards curling up. It may be useful. Stickly Prickly helped to unlace Tortoise's back plates, so that by twisting and straining, Slow and Solid actually managed to curl up a titty-wee bit. "Excellent," said Stickly Prickly, "but I shouldn't do any more just now. It's making you black in the face. Kindly lead me into the water once again, and I'll practice that side stroke which you say is so easy." And so Stickly Prickly practiced, and Slow Solid swam alongside. "Excellent," said Slow and Solid. "A little more practice will make you a regular whale. Now, if I may trouble you to unlace my back and front plates 2 holes more, I'll try that fascinating bend that you say is so easy. Won't Painted Jaguar be surprised?" "Excellent," said Stickly Prickly, all wet from the turbid Amazon. "I declare I shouldn't know you from one of my own family. 2 holes, I think, you said? A little more expression, please, and don't grunt quite so much, or Painted Jaguar may hear us. When you've finished, I want to try that long dive which you say is so easy. Won't Painted Jaguar be surprised?" And so Stickly Prickly dived, and Slow and Solid dived alongside. "Excellent," said Slow and Solid. "A little more attention to holding your breath, and you will be able to keep house at the bottom of the turbid Amazon. Now I'll try that exercise of putting my hind legs round my ears, which you say is so peculiarly comfortable. Won't Painted Jaguar be surprised?" "Excellent," said Stickly Prickly, "but it's straining your back plates a little. They're all overlapping now, instead of lying side by side." "Oh, that's the result of exercise," said Slow and Solid. "I've noticed that your prickles seem to be melting into one another, and that you're growing to look rather more like a pine cone and less like a chestnut burr than you used to." "Am I?" said Stickly Prickly. "That comes from my soaking in the water. Oh, won't Painted Jaguar be surprised?" They went on with their exercises, each helping the other, till morning came, and when the sun was high, they rested and dried themselves. Then they saw that they were both of them quite different from what they had been. "Stickly Prickly," said Tortoise after breakfast, "I am not what I was yesterday, but I think that I may yet amuse Painted Jaguar." "That was the very thing I was thinking just now," said Stickly Prickly. "I think scales are a tremendous improvement on prickles, to say nothing of being able to swim. Oh, won't Painted Jaguar be surprised? Let's go and find him." By and by they found Painted Jaguar, still nursing his paddy paw that had been hurt the night before. He was so astonished that he fell 3 times backward over his own painted tail without stopping. "Good morning," said Stickly Prickly. "And how is your dear gracious mummy this morning?" "She is quite well, thank you," said Painted Jaguar. "But you must forgive me if I do not at this precise moment recall your name." "That's unkind of you," said Stickly Prickly, "seeing that this time yesterday you tried to scoop me out of my shell with your paw." "But you hadn't any shell. It was all prickles," said Painted Jaguar. "I know it was. Just look at my paw." "You told me to drop into the turbid Amazon and be drowned," said Slow Solid. "Why are you so rude and forgetful today? Don't you remember what your mother told you?" said Stickly Prickly. "Can't curl but can swim, Stickly Prickly, that's him. Curls up but can't swim, Slow Solid, that's him." Then they both curled themselves up, and rolled round and round Painted Jaguar, till his eyes turned truly cartwheels in his head. Then he went to fetch his mother. "Mother," he said, "there are 2 new animals in the woods today, and the one that you said couldn't swim, swims, and the one that you said couldn't curl up, curls, and they've gone shares in their prickles, I think, because both of them are scaly all over, instead of one being smooth, and the other very prickly, and besides that, they are rolling round and round in circles, and I don't feel comfy." "Son, son," said Mother Jaguar ever so many times, graciously waving her tail, "a hedgehog is a hedgehog, and can't be anything but a hedgehog, and a tortoise is a tortoise, and can never be anything else." "But it isn't a hedgehog, and it isn't a tortoise. It's a little bit of both, and I don't know its proper name." "Nonsense," said Mother Jaguar. "Everything has its proper name. I should call it Armadillo till I found out the real one, and I should leave it alone." So Painted Jaguar did as he was told, especially about leaving them alone, But the curious thing is that from that day to this, O best beloved, no one on the banks of the turbid Amazon has ever called stickly, prickly, and slow solid anything except armadillo. There are hedgehogs and tortoises in other places, of course. There are some in my garden. But the real old and clever kind, with their scales lying lippity-lappity one over the other, like pine-cone scales, that lived on the banks of the turbid Amazon in the high and far-off days, are always called armadillos, because they were so clever. So that's all right, best beloved. Do you see? I've never sailed the Amazon, I've never reached Brazil, but the Donna Magdalena, they can go there when they will. Yes, weekly from Southampton, great steamers, white and gold, go rolling down to Rio. Roll down to Rio, and I'd like to roll to Rio some day before I'm old. I've never seen a jaguar, nor yet an armadillo, dillowing in his armor, and I suppose I never will, unless I go to Rio, these wonders to behold. Roll down to Rio, roll really down to Rio. Oh, I'd love to roll to Rio some day before I'm old. End of The Beginning of Armadillos by Rudyard Kipling. Read by Samantha Miles.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit completeaudiobooks.com for more quality content.
The Remarkable Rocket by Oscar Wilde. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Samantha Miles. The king's son was going to be married, so there were general rejoicings. He had waited a whole year for his bride, and at last she had arrived. She was a Russian princess, and had driven all the way from Finland in a sledge drawn by 6 reindeer. The sledge was shaped like a great golden swan, and between the swan's wings lay the little princess herself. Her long ermine cloak reached right down to her feet. On her head was a tiny cap of silver tissue, and she was as pale as the snow palace in which she had always lived. So pale was she that as she drove through the streets all the people wondered. "She is like a white rose!" they cried, and they threw down flowers on her from the balconies. At the gate of the castle the prince was waiting to receive her. He had dreamy violet eyes, and his hair was like fine gold. When he saw her, he sank upon one knee and kissed her hand. "Your picture was beautiful," he murmured, "but you are more beautiful than your picture." And the little princess blushed. "She was like a white rose before," said a young page to his neighbor, "but she is like a red rose now," and the whole court was delighted. For the next 3 days everybody went about saying, "White rose, red rose, white rose," and the king gave orders that the page's salary was to be doubled. As he received no salary at all, this was not of much use to him, but it was considered a great honor, and was duly published in the court gazette. When the 3 days were over, the marriage was celebrated. It was a magnificent ceremony, and the bride and bridegroom walked hand in hand under a canopy of purple velvet embroidered with little pearls. Then there was a state banquet, which lasted for 5 hours. The prince and princess sat at the top of the great hall and drank out of a cup of clear crystal. Only true lovers could drink out of this cup, for if false lips touched it, it grew grey and dull and cloudy. "It is quite clear that they love each other," said the little page, "as clear as crystal," and the king doubled his salary a second time. "What an honor!" cried all the courtiers. After the banquet there was to be a ball. The bride and bridegroom were to dance the rose dance together, and the king had promised to play the flute. He played very badly, but no one had ever dared to tell him so, because he was the king. Indeed, he knew only 2 airs, and was never quite certain which one he was playing, but it made no matter, for whatever he did, Everybody cried out, "Charming! Charming!" The last item on the program was a grand display of fireworks, to be let off exactly at midnight. The little princess had never seen a firework in her life, so the king had given orders that the royal pyrotechnist should be in attendance on the day of her marriage. "What are fireworks like?" she had asked the prince one morning as she was walking on the terrace. "They are like the aurora borealis," said the king, who always answered questions that were addressed to other people, "only much more natural. I prefer them to stars myself, as you always know when they are going to appear, and they are as delightful as my own flute-playing. You must certainly see them." So at the end of the king's garden a great stand had been set up, and as soon as the royal pyrotechnist had put everything in its proper place, the fireworks began to talk to each other. "The world is certainly very beautiful," cried a little squib. "Just look at those yellow tulips. Why, if they were real crackers they could not be lovelier. I am very glad I have travelled. Travel improves the mind wonderfully, and does away with all one's prejudices." "The king's garden is not the world, you foolish squib," said a big Roman candle. "The world is an enormous place, and it would take you 3 days to see it thoroughly." "Any place you love is the world to you," exclaimed the pensive Catherine Wheel, who had been attached to an old deal-box in early life, and prided herself on her broken heart. "But love is not fashionable any more. The poets have killed it. They wrote so much about it that nobody believed them, and I am not surprised. True love suffers, and is silent. I remember myself once, but it is no matter now. Romance is a thing of the past." "Nonsense," said the Roman candle. "Romance never dies. It is like the moon, and lives forever. The bride and bridegroom, for instance, love each other very dearly. I heard all about them this morning from a brown paper cartridge who happened to be staying in the same drawer as myself, and he knew the latest court news." But the Catherine Wheel shook her head. "Romance is dead. Romance is dead. Romance is dead," she murmured. She was one of those people who think that if you say the same thing over and over a great many times, it becomes true in the end. Suddenly a sharp, dry cough was heard, and they all looked round. It came from a tall, supercilious-looking rocket who was tied to the end of a long stick. He always coughed before he made any observation so as to attract attention. "Ahem, ahem," he said, and everybody listened except the poor Catherine Wheel, who was still shaking her head and murmuring, "Romance is dead." "Order! Order!" cried out a cracker. He was something of a politician, and had always taken a prominent part in the local elections, so he knew the proper parliamentary expressions to use. "Quite dead," whispered the Catherine Wheel, and she went off to sleep. As soon as there was perfect silence, the rocket coughed a 3rd time and began. He spoke with a very slow, distinct voice, as if he was dictating his memoirs, and always looked over the shoulder of the person to whom he was talking. In fact, he had a most distinguished manner. "How fortunate it is for the king's son," he remarked, "that he is to be married on the very day on which I am to be let off. Really, if it had been arranged beforehand, it could not have turned out better for him, but princes are always lucky." "Dear me," said the little squib, "I thought it was quite the other way, and that we were to be let off in the prince's honour." "It may be so with you," he answered. "Indeed, I have no doubt that it is. But with me it is different. I am a very remarkable rocket, and come of remarkable parents. My mother was the most celebrated Catherine Wheel of her day, and was renowned for her graceful dancing. When she made her great public appearance, she spun round 19 times before she went out, and each time that she did so, she threw into the air 7 pink stars. She was 3.5 feet in diameter, and made of the very best gunpowder. My father was a rocket like myself, and of French extraction. He flew so high that the people were afraid that he would never come down again. He did, though, for he was of a kindly disposition, and he made a most brilliant descent in a shower of golden rain. The newspapers wrote about his performance in very flattering terms. Indeed, the Court Gazette called him a triumph of pyrotechnic art. Pyrotechnic, pyrotechnic, you mean, said a Bengalite. I know it is pyrotechnic, for I saw it written on my own canister. Well, I said pylotechnic, answered the Rocket, in a severe tone of voice, and the Bengalite felt so crushed that he began at once to bully the little squibs, in order to show that he was still a person of some importance. I was saying, continued the Rocket, what was I saying? You were talking about yourself, replied the Roman Candle. Of course, I knew I was discussing some interesting subject when I was so rudely interrupted. I hate rudeness and bad manners of every kind, for I am extremely sensitive. No one in the whole world is so sensitive as I am, I am quite sure of that. What is a sensitive person? Said the Cracker to the Roman Candle. A person who, because he has corns himself, always treads on other people's toes, answered the Roman Candle in a low whisper, and the Cracker nearly exploded with laughter. Pray, what are you laughing at? inquired the Rocket. I am not laughing. I am laughing because I am happy, replied the Cracker. That is a very selfish reason, said the Rocket angrily. What right have you to be happy? You should be thinking about others. In fact, you should be thinking about me. I am always thinking about myself, and I expect everybody else to do the same. That is what is called sympathy. It is a beautiful virtue, and I possess it in a high degree. Suppose, for instance, anything happened to me tonight, what a misfortune that would be for everyone! The Prince and Princess would never be happy again, their whole married life would be spoiled, and as for the King, I know he would not get over it. Really, when I begin to reflect on the importance of my position, I am almost moved to tears. If you want to give pleasure to others, cried the Roman Candle, you had better keep yourself dry. Certainly, exclaimed the Bengalite, who was now in better spirits. That is only common sense. Common sense, indeed, said the Rocket indignantly. You forget that I am very uncommon and very remarkable. Why, anybody can have common sense, provided that they have no imagination. But I have imagination, for I never think of things as they really are. I always think of them as being quite different. As for keeping myself dry, there is evidently no one here who can at all appreciate an emotional nature. Fortunately for myself, I don't care. The only thing that sustains one through life is the consciousness of the immense inferiority of everybody else. This is a feeling I have always cultivated. But none of you have any hearts. Here you are laughing and making merry, just as if the Prince and Princess had not just been married. Well, really, exclaimed a small fire-balloon, why not? It is a most joyful occasion, and when I soar up into the air, I intend to tell the stars all about it. You will see them twinkle when I talk to them about the pretty bride. Ah, what a trivial view of life, said the Rocket. But it is only what I expected. There is nothing in you. You are hollow and empty. Why, perhaps the Prince and Princess may go to live in a country where there is a deep river, and perhaps they may have one only son, a little fair-haired boy with violet eyes like the Prince himself. Perhaps some day he may go out to walk with his nurse, and perhaps the nurse may go to sleep under a great elder tree, and perhaps the little boy may fall into the deep river and be drowned. What a terrible misfortune! Poor people, to lose their only son! It is really too dreadful. I shall never get over it. But they have not lost their only son, said the Roman Candle. No misfortune has happened to them at all. I never said that they had, replied the Rocket. I said that they might. If they had lost their only son, there would be no use in saying anything more about the matter. I hate people who cry over spilt milk. But when I think that they might lose their only son, I certainly am much affected. You certainly are, cried the Bengalite. In fact, you are the most affected person I ever met. You are the rudest person I ever met, said the Rocket, and you cannot understand my friendship for the Prince. Why, you don't even know him, growled the Roman Candle. I never said I knew him, answered the Rocket. I dare say that if I knew him, I should not be his friend at all. It is a very dangerous thing to know one's friends. You had really better keep yourself dry, said the fire-balloon. That is the important thing. Very important for you, I have no doubt, answered the Rocket, but I shall weep if I choose." And he actually burst into real tears, which flowed down his stick like raindrops, and nearly drowned 2 little beetles, who were just thinking of setting up house together, and were looking for a nice dry spot to live in. "He must have a truly romantic nature," said the Catherine Wheel, "for he weeps when there is nothing at all to weep about." And she heaved a deep sigh, and thought about the deal box. But the Roman candle and the Bengal light were quite indignant, and kept saying, "Humbug! Humbug!" at the top of their voices. They were extremely practical, and whenever they objected to anything, they called it humbug. Then the moon rose like a wonderful silver shield, and the stars began to shine, and a sound of music came from the palace. The prince and princess were leading the dance. They danced so beautifully that the tall white lilies peeped in at the window and watched them, and the great red poppies nodded their heads and beat time. Then 10 o'clock struck, and then 11, and then 12, and at the last stroke of midnight everyone came out on the terrace, and the king sent for the royal pyrotechnist. "Let the fireworks begin," said the king, and the royal pyrotechnist made a low bow, and marched down to the end of the garden. He had 6 attendants with him, each of whom carried a lighted torch at the end of a long pole. It was certainly a magnificent display. Whiz, whiz went the Catherine Wheel as she spun round and round. Boom, boom went the Roman candle. Then the squibs danced all over the place, and the Bengal lights made everything look scarlet. "Good-bye!" cried the fire balloon as he soared away, dropping tiny blue sparks. Bang, bang answered the crackers, who were enjoying themselves immensely. Everyone was a great success, except the remarkable rocket. He was so damp with crying that he could not go off at all. The best thing in him was the gunpowder, and that was so wet with tears that it was of no use. All his poor relations, to whom he would never speak, except with a sneer, shot up into the sky like wonderful golden flowers with blossoms of fire. "Huzzah! Huzzah!" cried the court, and the little princess laughed with pleasure. "I suppose they are reserving me for some grand occasion," said the rocket. "No doubt that is what it means," and he looked more supercilious than ever. The next day the workmen came to put everything tidy. "This is evidently a deputation," said the rocket. "I will receive them with becoming dignity." So he put his nose in the air, and began to frown severely, as if he were thinking about some very important subject. But they took no notice of him at all till they were just going away. Then one of them caught sight of him. "Hallo!" he cried. "What a bad rocket!" And he threw him over the wall into the ditch. "Bad rocket! Bad rocket!" he said as he whirled through the air. "Impossible! Grand rocket! That is what the man said." Bad and grand sound very much the same. Indeed, they often are the same. And he fell into the mud. "It is not comfortable here," he remarked, "but no doubt it is some fashionable watering place, and they have sent me away to recruit my health. My nerves are certainly very much shattered, and I require rest." Then a little frog with bright jewelled eyes and a green mottled coat swam up to him. "A new arrival, I see," said the frog. "Well, after all, there's nothing like mud. Give me rainy weather and a ditch, and I'm quite happy. Do you think it will be a wet afternoon? I am sure I hope so, but the sky is quite blue and cloudless. What a pity!" "Ahem, ahem," said the rocket, and he began to cough. "What a delightful voice you have!" cried the frog. "Really, it is quite like a croak, and croaking is of course the most musical sound in the world. You will hear our glee club this evening. We sit in the old duck pond close by the farmer's house, and as soon as the moon rises we begin. It is so entrancing that everybody lies awake to listen to us. In fact, it was only yesterday that I heard the farmer's wife say to her mother that she could not get a wink of sleep at night on account of us. It is most gratifying to find oneself so popular." "Ahem, ahem," said the rocket angrily. He was very much annoyed that he could not get a word in. "A delightful voice, certainly," continued the frog. "I hope you will come over to the duck pond. I am off to look for my daughters. I have 6 beautiful daughters, and I am so afraid the pike may meet them. He is a perfect monster, and would have no hesitation in breakfasting off them." Well, good-bye. I have enjoyed our conversation very much, I assure you. Conversation, indeed, said the Rocket. You have talked the whole time yourself. That is not conversation. Somebody must listen, answered the Frog. And I like to do all the talking myself. It saves time and prevents arguments. But I like arguments, said the Rocket. I hope not, said the Frog complacently. Arguments are extremely vulgar, for everybody in good society holds exactly the same opinions. Good-bye a second time. I see my daughters in the distance. And the little Frog swam away. You are a very irritating person, said the Rocket, and very ill-bred. I hate people who talk about themselves, as you do, when one wants to talk about oneself, as I do. It is what I call selfishness, and selfishness is a most detestable thing, especially to anyone of my temperament, for I am well known for my sympathetic nature. In fact, you should take example by me. You could not possibly have a better model. Now that you have the chance, you had better avail yourself of it, for I am going back to court almost immediately. I am a great favourite at court. In fact, the prince and princess were married yesterday in my honour. Of course, you know nothing of these matters, for you are a provincial. There is no good talking to him, said a dragon-fly, who was sitting on the top of a large brown bulrush. No good at all, for he has gone away. Well, that is his loss, not mine, answered the Rocket. I am not going to stop talking to him merely because he pays no attention. I like hearing myself talk. It is one of my greatest pleasures. I often have long conversations all by myself, and I am so clever that sometimes I don't understand a single word of what I am saying. Then you should certainly lecture on philosophy, said the dragon-fly, and he spread a pair of lovely gauze wings and soared away into the sky. How very silly of him not to stay here, said the Rocket. I am sure that he has not often got such a chance of improving his mind. However, I don't care a bit. Genius like mine is sure to be appreciated some day, and he sank down a little deeper into the mud. After some time, a large white duck swam up to him. She had yellow legs and webbed feet, and was considered a great beauty on account of her waddle. "Quack, quack, quack," she said. "What a curious shape you are! May I ask, were you born like that, or is it the result of an accident?" "It is quite evident that you have always lived in the country," answered the Rocket. "Otherwise you would know who I am. However, I excuse your ignorance. It would be unfair to expect other people to be as remarkable as oneself. You will no doubt be surprised to hear that I can fly up into the sky and come down in a shower of golden rain." "I don't think much of that," said the duck, "as I cannot see what use it is to anyone. Now, if you could plough the fields like the ox, or draw a cart like the horse, or look after the sheep like the collie dog, that would be something." "My good creature," cried the Rocket in a very haughty tone of voice, "I see that you belong to the lower orders. A person of my position is never useful. We have certain accomplishments, and that is more than sufficient. I have no sympathy myself with industry of any kind, least of all with such industries as you seem to recommend. Indeed, I have always been of opinion that hard work is simply the refuge of people who have nothing whatever to do." "Well, well," said the duck, who was of a very peaceable disposition, and never quarrelled with anyone. "Everybody has different tastes. I hope, at any rate, that you are going to take up your residence here." "Oh dear no," cried the Rocket. "I am merely a visitor, a distinguished visitor. The fact is that I find this place rather tedious. There is neither society here, nor solitude. In fact, it is essentially suburban. I shall probably go back to court, for I know that I am destined to make a sensation in the world." "I had thoughts of entering public life once myself," remarked the duck. "There are so many things that need reforming. Indeed, I took the chair at a meeting some time ago, and we passed resolutions condemning everything that we did not like. However, they did not seem to have much effect. Now I go in for domesticity, and look after my family." "I am made for public life," said the Rocket, "and so are all my relations, even the humblest of them. Whenever we appear, we excite great attention. I have not actually appeared myself, but when I do so it will be a magnificent sight. As for domesticity, it ages one rapidly, and distracts one's mind from higher things." "Ah, the higher things of life, how fine they are," said the duck. "That reminds me how hungry I feel." And she swam away down the stream, saying, "Quack, quack, quack." "Come back," screamed the rocket. "I have a great deal to say to you." But the duck paid no attention to him. "I am glad that she has gone," he said to himself. "She has a decidedly middle-class mind." And he sank a little deeper still into the mud, and began to think about the loneliness of genius, when suddenly 2 little boys in white smocks came running down the bank, with a kettle and some faggots. "This must be the deputation," said the rocket, and he tried to look very dignified. "Hallo!" cried one of the boys. "Look at this old stick! I wonder how it came here." And he picked the rocket out of the ditch. "Old stick," said the rocket. "Impossible! Gold stick! That is what he said. Gold stick is very complimentary. In fact, he mistakes me for one of the court dignitaries." "Let us put it into the fire," said the other boy. "It will help to boil the kettle." So they piled the faggots together and put the rocket on top, and lit the fire. "This is magnificent," cried the rocket. "They are going to let me off in broad daylight, so that everyone can see me." "We will go to sleep now," they said, "and when we wake up the kettle will be boiled." And they lay down on the grass and shut their eyes. The rocket was very damp, so he took a long time to burn. At last, however, the fire caught him. "Now I am going off," he cried, and he made himself very stiff and straight. "I know I shall go much higher than the stars, much higher than the moon, much higher than the sun. In fact, I shall go so high that— fizz, fizz, fizz!" And he went straight up into the air. "Delightful!" he cried. "I shall go on like this forever. What a success I am!" But nobody saw him. Then he began to feel a curious tingling sensation all over him. "Now I am going to explode," he cried. "I shall set the whole world on fire, and make such a noise that nobody will talk about anything else for a whole year." And he certainly did explode. Bang, bang, bang went the gunpowder. There was no doubt about it. But nobody heard him, not even the 2 little boys, for they were sound asleep. Then all that was left of him was a stick, and this fell down on the back of a goose, who was taking a walk by the side of the ditch. "Good heavens!" cried the goose. "It is going to rain sticks!" And she rushed into the water. "I knew I should create a great sensation," gasped the rocket, and he went out. End of The Remarkable Rocket by Oscar Wilde. Read by Samantha Miles. 3 Boys with Jugs of Molasses and Secret Ambitions by Carl Sandburg. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Samantha Miles. In the village of Liver and Onions, if 1 boy goes to the grocery for a jug of molasses, it is just like always. And if 2 boys go to the grocery for a jug of molasses together, it is just like always. But if 3 boys go to the grocery for a jug of molasses, each and all together, then it is not like always at all. At all. Ida Pika Pie grew up with wishes and wishes working inside him, and for every wish inside him he had a freckle outside on his face. Whenever he smiled, the smile ran way back into the far side of his face and got lost in the wishing freckles. Meeny Miny grew up with suspicions and suspicions working inside him, and after a while some of the suspicions got fastened on his eyes, and some of the suspicions got fastened on his mouth. So when he looked at other people straight in the face, they used to say, "Meeny Miny looks so sad-like. I wonder if he'll get by." Miny Mo was different. He wasn't sad-like and suspicious like Meeny Miny, nor was he full of wishes inside and freckles outside like Ida Pika Pie. He was all mixed up inside with wishes and suspicions, so he had a few freckles and a few suspicions on his face. When he looked other people straight in the face, they used to say, "I don't know whether to laugh or cry." So here we have 'em, 3 boys growing up with wishes, suspicions, and mixed up wishes and suspicions. They all looked different from each other. Each one, however, had a secret ambition, and all 3 had the same secret ambition. An ambition is a little creeper that creeps and creeps in your heart, night and day, singing a little song. Come and find me, come and find me. The secret ambition in the heart of Eeta Peeca Pie, Meeny Miny, and Miny Mo was an ambition to go railroading, to ride on railroad cars, night and day, year after year. The whistles and the wheels of railroad trains were music to them. Whenever the secret ambition crept in their hearts and made them too sad, so sad it was hard to live and stand for it, they would all 3 put their hands on each other's shoulder and sing the song of Joe. The chorus was like this. Joe broke his toe on the way to Mexico, came back, broke his back, sliding on the railroad track. One fine summer morning, all 3 mothers of all 3 boys gave each one a jug and said, "Go to the grocery and get a jug of molasses." All 3 got to the grocery at the same time, and all 3 went out of the door of the grocery together, each with a jug of molasses together, and each with his secret ambition creeping around in his heart, all 3 together. 2 blocks from the grocery they stopped under a slippery elm tree. Eeta Peeca Pie was stretching his neck, looking straight up into the slippery elm tree. He said it was always good for his freckles, and it helped his wishes, to stand under a slippery elm and look up. While he was looking up, his left hand let go the jug handle of the jug of molasses, and the jug went ka-flump, ka-flumpity-flump, down on the stone sidewalk, cracked to pieces, and let the molasses go running out over the sidewalk. If you have never seen it, let me tell you molasses running out of a broken jug over a stone sidewalk under a slippery elm tree looks peculiar and mysterious. Eeta Peeca Pie stepped into the molasses with his bare feet. "It's a lot of fun," he said. "It tickles all over." So Meeny Miny and Miny Mo both stepped into the molasses with their bare feet. Then what happened just happened. One got littler. Another got littler. All 3 got littler. "You look to me only big as a potato bug," said Eeta Peeca Pie to Meeny Miny and Miny Mo. "It's the same like you look to us," said Meeny Miny and Miny Mo to Eeta Peeca Pie. And then, because their secret ambition began to hurt them, they all stood with hands on each other's shoulders and sang the Mexico Joe song. Off the sidewalk they strolled, across a field of grass. They passed many houses of spiders and ants. In front of one house they saw Mrs. Spider over a tub washing clothes for Mr. Spider. "Why do you wear that frying pan on your head?" they asked her. In this country all ladies wear the frying pan on their head when they want a hat. "But what if you want a hat when you are frying with the frying pan?" asked Eeta Peeca Pie. "That never happens to any respectable lady in this country." "Don't you never have no new-style hats?" asked Meeny Miny. "No, but we always have new-style frying pans every spring and fall." Hidden in the roots of a pink grass clump, they came to a city of twisted-nosed spiders. On the main street was a store with a show window full of pink parasols. They walked in and said to the clerk, "We want to buy parasols." "We don't sell parasols here," said the spider clerk. "Well, lend us a parasol apiece," said all 3. "Gladly, most gladly," said the clerk. "How do you do it?" asked Eeta. "I don't have to," answered the spider clerk. "How did it begin?" "It never was otherwise." "Don't you never get tired?" "Every parasol is a joy." "What do you do when the parasols are gone?" "They always come back. These are the famous twisted nose parasols made from the famous pink grass. You will lose them all 3. Then they will all walk back to me here in this store on Main Street. I cannot sell you something I know you will surely lose. Neither can I ask you to pay for something you will forget, somewhere, sometime, and when you forget it, it will walk back here to me again. Look! Look!" As he said "look," the door opened, and 5 pink parasols came waltzing in and waltzed up into the show window. They always come back. Everybody forgets. Take your parasols and go. You will forget them, and they will come back to me. "He looks like he had wishes inside him," said Ida Pika Pie. "He looks like he had suspicions," said Meeny Miny. "He looks like he was all mixed up, wishes and suspicions," said Miny Mo. And once more, because they all felt lonesome and their secret ambitions were creeping and eating, they put their hands on their shoulders and sang the Mexico Joe song. Then came happiness. They entered the potato bug country. And they had luck first of all the first hour they were in the potato bug country. They met a potato bug millionaire. "How are you a millionaire?" they asked him. "Because I got 1,000,000, he answered. "1,000,000 what?" "1,000,000 fleems." "Who wants fleems?" "You want fleems if you're going to live here." "Why so?" "Because fleems is our money. In the potato bug country, if you got no fleems you can't buy nothing or anything. But if you got 1,000,000 fleems, you're a potato bug millionaire." Then he surprised them. "I like you because you got wishes and freckles," he said to Ida Pika Pie, filling the pockets of Ida with fleems. "And I like you because you got suspicions and you're sad-like," he said to Meeny Miny, filling Meeny Miny's pockets full of fleems. "And I like you because you got some wishes and some suspicions, and you look mixed up," he said to Miny Mo, sticking handfuls and handfuls of fleems into the pockets of Miny Mo. Wishes do come true, and suspicions do come true. Here they had been wishing all their lives, and had suspicions of what was going to happen, and now it all came true. With their pockets filled with fleems they rode on all the railroad trains of the potato bug country. They went to the railroad stations and bought tickets for the fast trains and the slow trains and even the trains that back up and run backward instead of where they start to go. On the dining cars of the railroads of the potato bug country they ate wonder ham from the famous potato bug pigs, eggs from the potato bug hens, etc. It seemed to them they stayed a long while in the potato bug country, years and years. Yes, the time came when all their fleems were gone. Then, whenever they wanted a railroad ride, or something to eat, or a place to sleep, they put their hands on each other's shoulders and sang the Mexico Joe song. In the potato bug country they all said the Mexico Joe song was wonderful. One morning, while they were waiting to take an express train on the early Ohio and Southwestern, they sat near the roots of a big potato plant under the big green leaves. And far above them they saw a dim black cloud, and they heard a shaking and a rustling and a spattering. They did not know it was a man of the village of Liver and Onions. They did not know it was Mr. Sniggers putting Paris green on the potato plants. A big drop of Paris green spattered down and fell into the heads and shoulders of all 3, Ida Pika Pie, Meeny Miny, and Miny Mo. Then what happened just happened. They got bigger and bigger, 1, 2, 3, and when they jumped up and ran out of the potato rows, Mr. Sniggers thought they were boys playing tricks. When they got home to their mothers and told all about the jug of molasses breaking on the stone sidewalk under the slippery elm tree, their mothers said it was careless. The boys said it was lucky because it helped them get their secret ambitions. And a secret ambition is a little creeper that creeps and creeps in your heart, night and day, singing a little song. Come and find me, come and find me. End of 3 Boys with Jugs of Molasses and Secret Ambitions by Carl Sandburg. Read by Samantha Miles.
The Firefly's Lovers by William Elliot Griffiths. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Firefly's Lovers. On the southern and sunny side of the castle moats of the Fukui Castle in Echizen, the water had long ago become shallow, so that lotus lilies grew luxuriantly. Deep in the heart of one of the great flowers, whose petals were as pink as the lining of a seashell, lived the king of the fireflies, Hiyo, whose only daughter was the lovely Princess Hotaru. While still a child, the princess had been carefully kept at home within the pink petals of the lily, never going even to the edges except to see her father fly off on his journey. Dutifully she waited until of age, when the fire glowed in her own body and shone beautifully, illuminating the lotus, until its light gleamed like a lamp within a globe of coral. Every night her light grew brighter and brighter, until at last it was as mellow as gold. Then her father said, "My daughter is now of age. She may fly abroad with me sometimes, and when the proper suitor comes, she may marry whom she will." So Hotaru flew forth in and out among the lotus lilies of the moat, then into rich rice fields, and at last far off to the indigo meadows. Wherever she went, a crowd of suitors followed her, for she had the singular power of attracting all the night-flying insects to herself. But she cared for none of their attentions, and though she spoke politely to them all, she gave encouragement to none. Yet some of the sheeny-winged gallants called her a coquette. One night she said to her mother, the queen, "I have met many admirers, but I do not wish a husband from any of them. Tonight I shall stay at home, and if any of them love me truly, they will come and pay me court here. Then I shall lay an impossible duty on them. If they are wise, they will not try to perform it. But if they love their lives more than they love me, I do not want any of them. Whoever succeeds may have me for his bride." "As you will, my child," said the queen mother, who arrayed her daughter in her most resplendent robes, and set her on the throne in the heart of the lotus. Then she gave orders to her bodyguard to keep all suitors at a respectful distance, lest some stupid gallant, a hornbug or a cockchafer, dazzled by the light, should approach too near and hurt the princess or shake her throne. No sooner had twilight faded away than forth came the golden beetle, who stood on a stamen and making obeisance said, "I am Lord Greengold. I offer my house, my fortune, and my love to Princess Hotaru." "Go and bring me fire, and I will be your bride," said Hotaru. With a bow of the head, the beetle opened his wings and departed with a stately whir. Next came a shining bug with wings and body as black as lamp smoke, who solemnly professed his passion. He received the same answer. "Bring me fire, and you may have me for your wife." Off flew the bug with a buzz. Pretty soon came the scarlet dragonfly, expecting so to dazzle the princess by his gorgeous colors that she would accept him at once. "I decline your offer," said the princess, "unless you bring me a flash of fire." Swift was the flight of the dragonfly on his errand, and in came the beetle with a tremendous buzz, and ardently pleaded his suit. "I will say yes, if you bring me fire," said the glittering princess. Suitor after suitor appeared to woo the daughter of the king of the fireflies, until every petal was dotted with them. One after another in a long troop they appeared, each in his own way, proudly, humbly, boldly, mildly, with flattery, with boasting, even with tears, proffered his love, told his rank or expatiated on his fortune or vowed his constancy, sang his tune or played his music. To every one of her lovers the princess in modest voice returned the same answer. "Bring me fire, and I'll be your bride." So without telling his rivals, each one thinking he had the secret alone, sped away after fire. but none ever came back to wed the princess. Alas for the poor suitors! The beetle whizzed off to a house near by, through the paper windows of which light glimmered. So full was he of his passion that, thinking nothing of wood or iron, he dashed his head against a nail and fell dead on the ground. The black bug flew into a room where a poor student was reading. His lamp was only a dish of earthenware full of rapeseed oil, with a wick made of pith. Knowing nothing of oil, the lovelorn bug crawled into the dish to reach the flame, and in a few seconds was drowned as in a sea. "What's that?" said a thrifty housewife, sitting with needle in hand, as her lamp flared up for a moment, smoking the chimney and then cracking it. While picking out the scorched bits, she found a roasted dragonfly, whose scarlet wings were all burned off. Mad with love, the brilliant hawk moth, afraid of the flame, yet determined to win the fire for the princess, hovered round and round the candle flame, coming nearer and nearer each time. Now or never, the princess or death! He buzzed as he darted forward to snatch a flash of flame, but singeing his wings, he fell helplessly down and died in agony. "What a fool he was, to be sure," said the ugly clothes moth, coming on the spot. "I'll get the fire. I'll crawl up inside the candle." So he climbed up the hollow paper wick, and was nearly to the top, and close to the blue part of the flame, when the man, snuffing the wick, crushed him to death. Sad indeed was the fate of the lovers of Hio's daughter. Some hovered around the beacons on the headland, some fluttered about the great wax candles which stood 8 feet high in their brass sockets in the temples of Buddha. Some burned their noses at the top of incense sticks, or were nearly choked by the smoke. Some danced all night round the lanterns in the shrines. Some sought the sepulchral lamps in the graveyards. One visited the cremation furnace, another the kitchen, where a feast was going on. Another chased the sparks that flew out of the chimney, but none brought fire to the princess, or won the lover's prize. Many lost their feelers, had their shining bodies scorched, or their wings singed, but most of them, alas, lay dead, black, and cold next morning. As the priests trimmed the lamps in the shrines, and the servant maids the lanterns, each said alike, "The Princess Hotaru must have had many lovers last night." Alas, alas, poor suitors! Some tried to snatch a streak of green fire from the cat's eyes, and were snapped up for their pains. One attempted to get a mouthful of bird's breath, but was swallowed alive. A carrion beetle, the ugly lover, crawled off to the seashore and found some fish scales that emitted light. The stag beetle climbed a mountain, and in a rotten tree stump found some bits of glowing wood like fire. But the distance was so great that long before they reached the castle moat, it was daylight, and the fire had gone out. So they threw their fish scales and old wood away. The next day was one of great mourning, and there were so many funerals going on that Himaro, the prince of the fireflies on the north side of the castle moat, inquired of his servants the cause. Then he learned for the first time of the glittering princess. Upon this the prince, who had just succeeded his father upon the throne, fell in love with the princess and resolved to marry her. He sent his chamberlain to ask of her father his daughter in marriage, according to true etiquette. The father agreed to the prince's proposal, with the condition that the prince should obey her behest in one thing, which was to come in person, bringing her fire. Then the prince, at the head of his glittering battalions, came in person, and filled the lotus palace with a flood of golden light. But Hotaru was so beautiful that her charms paled not their fire, even in the blaze of the prince's glory. The visit ended in wooing, and the wooing in wedding. On the night appointed, in a palanquin made of the white lotus petals, amid the blazing torches of the prince's battalions of warriors, Hotaru was borne to the prince's palace, and there the prince and princess were joined in wedlock. Many generations have passed since Himaro and Hotaru were married, and still it is the whim of all firefly princesses that their base-born lovers must bring fire as their love offering or lose their prize. Else would the glittering fair ones be wearied unto death by the importunity of their lovers. Great indeed is the loss, for in this quest of fire many thousand insects, attracted by the firefly, are burned to death in the vain hope of winning the fire that shall gain the cruel but beautiful one that fascinates them. It is for this cause that each night insects hover around the lamp flame, and every morning a crowd of victims drowned in the oil or scorched in the flame must be cleaned from the lamp. This is the reason why young ladies catch and imprison the fireflies to watch the war of insect love, in the hope that they may have human lovers who will dare as much through fire and flood as they. End of The Firefly's Lovers by William Elliot Griffiths. Read by Maricel Cui. The Grateful Crane by William Elliot Griffiths. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Grateful Crane. Fighting sparrows fear not man, as the old proverb says. Yet it was not a sparrow but a crane that fell down out of the air. Near the feet of Musai, the farmer's boy, it lay, as he waded in the ooze of his rice field, working from daybreak to sundown. The farmer's boy was used to cranes, for in the plow's furrow on the dry land, these long-legged birds walked close behind, not the least afraid in the Mikado's dominions, for who would hurt the white-breasted creature that everyone called the Honorable Lord Crane? The graceful birds seemed to love to be near man when he worked in the wet or paddy fields, where under 4 inches of water the seeds were planted and the rice plants grew. So graceful in all its movements is the crane, that many a dainty little maid who acts politely hears herself spoken of as the bird that rises from the water without muddying the stream. Musai hurried to the grassy bank at the edge of the paddy field as fast as he could wade through the liquid mud to see what was the matter with the crane. Throwing down his hoe and looking in the grass, he saw that an arrow was sticking in the crane's back, and that red drops of blood dappled its white plumage. Instead of seeming frightened when the man came near, the bird bent down its neck, as if to submit to whatever the farmer's boy should do. Gently, Musai plucked out the arrow and helped the bird to rise, pushing back the undergrowth so that its broad white pinions could have free play. After a few feeble attempts to fly, it spread its wings, rose up from the earth, and after circling several times round its benefactor as though to thank him, it flew off to the mountain. Musai went back to his work, hoping that in season his labor would yield a good crop. He had his widowed mother to support and must needs toil every day. His one delight was to come home, weary after the long hours of labor in the muddy rice field, and have a hot bath. This his mother always had ready for him. Then, clean and with a fresh kimono, and a little rest before supper time, he was ready for a quiet evening with the neighbors. So in routine the days passed by until autumn was near at hand. One day, returning before the sun was fully set, he found seated beside his mother a lovely girl. In spite of his contemptible appearance after a day's toil, working bare-legged in the mire, she welcomed him with the grace of a princess. Not thinking of returning the salute, in his unwashed condition, he took off his head kerchief, drew in his breath, and bowing to his mother asked, "Who is the Honorable that side, and how comes she into this miserable hut?" "My son," replied his mother, "though you are a man, you have as yet no wife. Your virtues of obedience, filial reverence, fidelity, and politeness have made you well known. Hence, this fair damsel is not unwilling to become your wife. But without your consent, I could not answer her proposal. What do you think about it?" The young farmer, though highly complimented, at first said little, but he thought hard. "Daintily reared, and perhaps of noble birth is she, but should I gratify her desire, how can she bear the poverty to which we are accustomed? Will she be patient when she has to suffer hunger? Or shall we be separated, and that which promises love and happiness last only a little while, to pass away, leaving gloom and sorrow behind?" But as the days slipped along, and when he saw how kind she was to her new mother, ever patient and self-denying in loving reverence, all his fears were driven away like clouds before the wind. So the young man and woman were married. But when the full autumn time came for the rice ears to fill and round out, nothing was found but husk and shell. The crop was a total failure. With heavy taxes unpaid, and no food in the house, starvation loomed before them. By winter, all were in dire distress. Then the patient wife revealed new powers and cheered her husband, saying, "I can spin such cloth as was never made in this province, if you will build me a separate room. I cannot weave here, or make the fine pattern of red and white, except when alone and in perfect silence. Build me a room, and the money you need will flow in." The old mother was doubtful as to her daughter-in-law's project, and even Musai was but half-hearted. Yet he went to work diligently. With beam and wattle and thatch, floor of mats and window of latticed paper, with walls made tight because well daubed with clay, he built the room apart. There alone, day by day, secluded from all, the sweet wife toiled unseen. The mother and husband patiently waited, until after a week the little woman rejoined the little family circle. In her hands she bore a roll of woven stuff, white and sheeny, as lustrous and pure as fresh fallen snow. Yet here and there a crimson thread in the stuff did but intensify the purity of the otherwise unflecked whiteness. Pure red and pure white were the only colors of this wonderful fabric. "What shall we call it?" inquired the amazed husband. "It has no name, for there is none other in the world like it," said the fair weaver. "But I must have a name. I shall take it to the daimyo. He will not buy if he does not know how it is called." "Then," said the wife, "tell him its name is White Crane's Downcloth." Quickly passed the snowy fabric into the hands of the lord of the castle, who sent it as a present to the empress in Kyoto. All were amazed by it, and the empress commanded the donor to be richly rewarded. The farmer husband, bearing 1,000 pieces of coin in his bag, hastened home to spread the shining silver at his mother's feet, and to thank the wife who had brought him fortune. A feast followed, and for many weeks the family lived easily on the money thus gained. Then, when again on the edge of need, Musai asked his wife if she were willing to weave another web of the wonderful crane's down cloth. Cheerfully she agreed, cautioning him to leave her in privacy and not to look upon her until she came forth with the cloth. But alas, for the spirit of prying impertinence and wicked curiosity! Not satisfied with having been delivered from starvation by a wife that served him like a slave, Musai stealthily crept up to the paper partition, touched his tongue to the latticed pane, and poked his finger noiselessly through, thus making a round hole to which he glued his eye and looked in. What a sight! There was no woman at work, but a noble white crane, the same that he had seen in the field and from whose back he had extracted the hunter's arrow. Bending over the spinning wheel, the bird pulled from her own breast the silky down, and by twining and twisting, made it into the finest thread which mortals ever beheld. From time to time, she pressed from her heart's blood red drops with which to dye some strands, and thus the weaving went on. The web of the cloth was nearly finished. Musai, astounded, looked on without moving, until suddenly called by his mother, he cried out in response, "Yes, I'm coming!" The startled crane turned and saw the eye in the wall. Throwing down thread and web, she moved angrily to the door, gave a shrill scream, and flew out under the sky. Like a white speck against the blue hills, she appeared for a little while, and then was lost to sight. Son and mother once more faced poverty and loneliness, and Musai again splashed, bare-legged in the rice field. End of The Grateful Crane by William Elliot Griffiths. Read by Maricel Cui.
The Origin of the Narran Lake by K. Langloh Parker. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. The Origin of the Narran Lake by K. Langloh Parker. Old Byamee said to his two young wives, Beranulu and Kananbili, "I have stuck a white feather between the hind legs of a bee, and am going to let it go and then follow it to its nest, that I may get honey. While I go for the honey, go you two out and get frogs and yams, then meet me at Kurigel Spring, where we will camp, for sweet and clear is the water there." The wives, taking their goolays and yam sticks, went out as he told them. Having gone far and dug out many yams and frogs, they were tired when they reached Kurigel, and seeing the cool, fresh water, they longed to bathe. But first they built a bowshade, and there left their goolays holding their food, and the yams and frogs they had found. When their camp was ready for the coming of Byamee, who having wooed his wives with a nulla, kept them obedient by fear of the same weapon, then went the girls to the spring to bathe. Gladly they plunged in, having first divested themselves of their gomilas, which they were still young enough to wear, and which they left on the ground near the spring. Scarcely were they enjoying the cool rest the water gave their hot, tired limbs, when they were seized and swallowed by two kurreahs. Having swallowed the girls, the kurreahs dived into an opening in the side of the spring, which was the entrance to an underground watercourse leading to the Narran River. Through this passage they went, taking all the water from the spring with them into the Narran, whose course they also dried as they went along. Meantime, Byamee, unwitting the fate of his wives, was honey hunting. He had followed the bee with the white feather on it for some distance. Then the bee flew on to some butta flowers, and would move no further. Byamee said, "Something has happened, or the bee would not stay here, and refused to be moved on toward its nest. I must go to Kurigel Spring and see if my wives are safe. Something terrible has surely happened." And Byamee turned in haste towards the spring. When he reached there, he saw the bowshed his wives had made. He saw the yams they had dug from the ground, and he saw the frogs, but Beranulu and Konanbili he saw not. He called aloud for them, but no answer. He went towards the spring. On the edge of it he saw the gomilas of his wives. He looked into the spring, and seeing it dry, he said, "It is the work of the kurreahs. They have opened the underground passage and gone with my wives to the river, and opening the passage has dried the spring. Well do I know where the passage joins the Narran, and there will I swiftly go." Arming himself with spears and woggaras, he started in pursuit. He soon reached the deep hole where the underground channel of the Corrigel joined the Narran. There he saw what he had never seen before, namely, this deep hole dry. And he said, "They have emptied the holes as they went along, taking the water with them. But well know I the deep holes of the river. I will not follow the bend, thus trebling the distance I have to go. But I will cut across from big hole to big hole, and by so doing I may yet get ahead of the Correas." On swiftly sped Byamee, making short cuts from big hole to big hole, and his track is still marked by the morilla ridges that stretch down the Narran, pointing in towards the deep holes. Every hole as he came to it he found dry, until at last he reached the end of the Narran. The hole there was still quite wet and muddy. Then he knew he was near his enemies, and soon he saw them. He managed to get, unseen, a little way ahead of the Correas. He hid himself behind a big deal tree. As the Correas came near they separated, one turning to go in another direction. Quickly Byamee hurled one spear after another, wounding both Correas, who writhed with pain and lashed their tails furiously, making great hollows in the ground, which the water they had brought with them quickly filled. Thinking they might again escape him, Byamee drove them from the water with his spears, and then at close quarters he killed them with his woggaras. And ever afterwards, at flood time, the Narran flowed into this hollow which the Correas in their writhings had made. When Byamee saw that the Correas were quite dead, he cut them open and took out the bodies of his wives. They were covered with wet slime, and seemed quite lifeless, but he carried them and laid them on 2 nests of red ants. Then he sat down at some little distance and watched them. The ants quickly covered the bodies, cleaned them rapidly of the wet slime, and soon Byamee noticed the muscles of the girls twitching. "Ah," he said, "there is life. They feel the sting of the ants." Almost as he spoke came a sound as of a thunderclap, but the sound seemed to come from the ears of the girls. And as the echo was dying away, slowly the girls rose to their feet. For a moment they stood apart, a dazed expression on their faces. Then they clung together, shaking as if stricken with a deadly fear. But Byamee came to them and explained how they had been rescued from the Correas by him. He bade them to beware of ever bathing in the deep holes of the Narran, lest such holes be the haunt of Correas. Then he bade them look at the water now at Bugera, and he said, "Soon will the black swans find their way here, the pelicans and the ducks. Where there was dry land and stones in the past, in the future there will be water and water fowl. From henceforth, where the Narran runs it will run into this hole, and by the spreading of its waters will a big lake be made." And what Byamee said has come to pass, as the Narran Lake shows, with its large sheet of water spreading for miles, the home of thousands of wild fowl. End of The Origin of the Narran Lake by K. Langloh Parker.
Uncle David's Nonsensical Story About Giants and Fairies by Catherine Sinclair. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Uncle David's Nonsensical Story About Giants and Fairies. In the days of yore, children were not all such clever, good, sensible people as they are now. Lessons were then considered rather a plague, sugar plums were still in demand, holidays continued yet in fashion, and toys were not then made to teach mathematics, nor storybooks to give instruction in chemistry and navigation. These were very strange times, and there existed at that period a very idle, greedy, naughty boy, such as we never hear of in the present day. His father and mother were no matter who, and he lived no matter where. His name was Master No Book, and he seemed to think his eyes were made for nothing but to stare out of the windows, and his mouth for no other purpose but to eat. This young gentleman hated lessons like mustard, both of which brought tears into his eyes, and during school hours he sat gazing at his books, pretending to be busy, while his mind wandered away to wish impatiently for dinner, and to consider where he could get the nicest pies, pastry, ices, and jellies, while he smacked his lips at the very thoughts of them. Whenever Master No Book spoke, it was always to ask for something, and you might continually hear him say in a whining tone of voice, "Father, may I take this piece of cake? Aunt Sarah, will you give me an apple? Mother, do send me the whole of that plum pudding." Indeed, very frequently, when he did not get permission to gourmandize, this naughty glutton helped himself without leave. Even his dreams were like his waking hours, for he had often a horrible nightmare about lessons, thinking he was smothered with Greek lexicons, or pelted out of the school with a shower of English grammars, while one night he fancied himself sitting down to devour an enormous plum cake, and all on a sudden it became transformed into a Latin dictionary. One afternoon, Master No Book, having played truant all day from school, was lolling on his mother's best sofa in the drawing-room, with his leather boots tucked up on the satin cushions, and nothing to do but suck a few oranges, and nothing to think of but how much sugar to put upon them, when suddenly an event took place which filled him with astonishment. A sound of soft music stole into the room, becoming louder and louder the longer he listened, till at length, in a few moments afterwards, a large hole burst open in the wall of his room, and there stepped into his presence 2 magnificent fairies, just arrived from their castles in the air, to pay him a visit. They had travelled all the way on purpose to have some conversation with Master No Book, and immediately introduced themselves in a very ceremonious manner. The Fairy Do-Nothing was gorgeously dressed, with a wreath of flaming gas round her head, a robe of gold tissue, a necklace of rubies, and a bouquet in her hand of glittering diamonds. Her cheeks were rouged to the very eyes, her teeth were set in gold, and her hair was of a most brilliant purple. In short, so fine and fashionable-looking a fairy never was seen in a drawing-room before. The Fairy Teach-all, who followed next, was simply dressed in white muslin, with bunches of natural flowers in her light brown hair, and she carried in her hand a few neat small volumes, which Master No Book looked at with a shudder of aversion. The 2 fairies now informed him that they very often invited large parties of children to spend some time at their palaces, but as they lived in quite an opposite direction, it was necessary for the young guests to choose which it would be best to visit first. Therefore they had now come to inquire of Master No Book whom he thought it would be most agreeable to accompany on the present occasion. "In my house," said the Fairy Teach-all, speaking with a very sweet smile and a soft, pleasing voice, "you shall be taught to find pleasure in every sort of exertion, for I delight in activity and diligence. My young friends rise at 7 every morning, and amuse themselves with working in a beautiful garden of flowers, rearing whatever fruit they wish to eat, visiting among the poor, associating pleasantly together, studying the arts and sciences, and learning to know the world in which they live, and to fulfill the purposes for which they have been brought into it. In short, all our amusements tend to some useful object, either for our own improvement or the good of others, and you will grow wiser, better, and happier every day you remain in the palace of knowledge." "But in Castle Needless, where I live," interrupted the Fairy Do-Nothing, rudely pushing her companion aside with an angry, contemptuous look, "we never think of exerting ourselves for anything. You may put your head in your pocket and your hands in your sides as long as you choose to stay. No one is ever asked a question that he may be spared the trouble of answering. We lead the most fashionable life imaginable, for nobody speaks to anybody. Each of my visitors is quite an exclusive, and sits with his back to as many of the company as possible, in the most comfortable armchair that can be contrived. There, if you are only so good as to take the trouble of wishing for anything, it is yours without even turning an eye round to look where it comes from. Dresses are provided of the most magnificent kind, which go on themselves without you having the smallest annoyance with either buttons or strings, games which you can play without an effort of thought, and dishes dressed by a French cook smoking hot under your nose from morning till night, while any rain we have is either made of lemonade or lavender water, and in winter it generally snows iced punch for an hour during the forenoon. Nobody need to be told which fairy Master No Book preferred, and quite charmed at his own good fortune in receiving so agreeable an invitation, he eagerly gave his hand to the splendid new acquaintance who promised him so much pleasure and ease, and gladly proceeded in a carriage lined with velvet, stuffed with downy pillows, and drawn by milk-white swans, to that magnificent residence, Castle Needless, which was lighted by 1,000 windows during the day, and by 1,000,000 of lamps every night. Here Master No Book enjoyed a constant holiday and a constant feast, while a beautiful lady covered with jewels was ready to tell him stories from morning till night, and servants waited to pick up his playthings if they fell, or to draw out his purse or his pocket-handkerchief when he wished to use them. Thus Master No Book lay dozing for hours and days on rich embroidered cushions, never stirring from his place, but admiring the view of trees covered with the richest burnt almonds, grottos of sugar candy, a jet d'eau of champagne, a wide sea which tasted of sugar instead of salt, and a bright clear pond filled with goldfish that let themselves be caught whenever he pleased. Nothing could be more complete, and yet, very strange to say, Master No Book did not seem particularly happy. This appears exceedingly unreasonable when so much trouble was taken to please him, but the truth is that every day he became more fretful and peevish. No sweetmeats were worth the trouble of eating, nothing was pleasant to play at, and in the end he wished it were possible to sleep all day as well as all night. Not 100 miles from the Fairy Do-Nothing's palace there lived a most cruel monster, called the giant Snap-'em-up, who looked, when he stood up, like a tall steeple of a great church, raising his head so high that he could peep over the loftiest mountains, and was obliged to climb up a ladder to comb his own hair. Every morning regularly this prodigiously great giant walked round the world before breakfast for an appetite, after which he made tea in a large lake, used the sea as a slop basin, and boiled his kettle on Mount Vesuvius. He lived in great style, and his dinners were most magnificent, consisting very often of an elephant roasted whole, ostrich patties, a tiger smothered in onions, stewed lions, and whale soup. But for a side dish his greatest favourite consisted of little boys, as fat as possible, fried in crumbs of bread, with plenty of pepper and salt. No children were so well fed or in such good condition for eating as those in the Fairy Do-Nothing's garden, who was a very particular friend of the giant Snap-'em-up's, and who sometimes laughingly said she would give him a licence, and call her own garden his preserve, because she always allowed him to help himself, whenever he pleased, to as many of her visitors as he chose, without taking the trouble to even count them. And in return for such extreme civility, the giant very frequently invited her to dinner. Snap-'em-up's favourite sport was to see how many brace of little boys he could bag in a morning. So, in passing along the streets, he peeped into all the drawing-rooms, without having occasion to get upon tiptoe, and picked up every young gentleman who was idly looking out of the windows, and even a few occasionally who were playing truant from school. But busy children seemed always somehow quite out of his reach. One day, when Master No Book felt even more lazy, more idle, and more miserable than ever, he lay beside a perfect mountain of toys and cakes, wondering what to wish for next, and hating the very sight of everything and everybody. At last he gave so loud a yawn of weariness and disgust that his jaw very nearly fell out of joint, and then he sighed so deeply that the giant Snap-'em-up heard the sound as he passed along the road after breakfast, and instantly stepped into the garden with his glass at his eye to see what was the matter. Immediately, on observing a large, fat, overgrown boy, as round as a dumpling, lying on a bed of roses, he gave a cry of delight, followed by a gigantic peal of laughter which was heard 3 miles off, and picking up Master No-book between his finger and thumb, with a pinch that very nearly broke his ribs, he carried him rapidly towards his own castle, while the Fairy Do-nothing laughingly shook her head as he passed, saying, "That little man does me great credit. He has only been fed for a week, and is as fat already as a prize ox. What a dainty morsel he will be! When do you dine to-day, in case I should have time to look in upon you?" On reaching home, the giant immediately hung up Master No-book by the hair of his head on a prodigious hook in the larder, having first taken some large lumps of nasty suet, forcing them down his throat to make him become still fatter, and then stirring the fire that he might be almost melted with heat, to make his liver grow larger. On a shelf quite near, Master No-book perceived the bodies of 6 other boys, whom he remembered to have seen fattening in the Fairy Do-nothing's garden, while he recollected how some of them had rejoiced at the thought of leading a long, useless, idle life, with no one to please but themselves. The enormous cook now seized hold of Master No-book, brandishing her knife with an aspect of horrible determination, intending to kill him, while he took the trouble of screaming and kicking in the most desperate manner, when the giant turned gravely round and said that, as pigs were considered a much greater dainty when whipped to death than killed in any other way, he meant to see whether children might not be improved by it also. Therefore she might leave the great hog of a boy till he had time to try the experiment, especially as his own appetite would be improved by the exercise. This was a dreadful prospect for the unhappy prisoner, but meantime it prolonged his life a few hours, as he was immediately hung up in the larder and left to himself. There, in torture of mind and body, like a fish upon a hook, the wretched boy began at last to reflect seriously upon his former ways, and to consider what a happy home he might have had if he could only have been satisfied with business and pleasure succeeding each other, like day and night, while lessons might have come in as a pleasant source to his play hours, and his play hours as a source to his lessons. In the midst of many reflections, which were all very sensible, though rather too late, Master No-book's attention became attracted by the sound of many voices laughing, talking, and singing, which caused him to turn his eyes in a new direction, when, for the first time, he observed that the Fairy Teach-all's garden lay upon a beautiful sloping bank not far off. There a crowd of merry, noisy, rosy-cheeked boys were busily employed, and seemed happier than the day was long, while poor Master No-book watched them during his own miserable hours, envying the enjoyment with which they raked the flower borders, gathered the fruits, carried baskets of vegetables to the poor, worked with carpenter's tools, drew pictures, shot with bows and arrows, played at cricket, and then sat in the sunny arbours learning their tasks, or talking agreeably together, till at length, the dinner-bell having been rung, the whole party sat merrily down with hearty appetites and cheerful good humour to an entertainment of plain roast meat and pudding, where the Fairy Teach-all presided herself, and helped her guests moderately to as much as was good for each. Large tears rolled down the cheeks of Master No-book while watching this scene, and remembering that if he had known what was best for him, he might have been as happy as the happiest of these excellent boys, instead of suffering ennui and weariness, as he had done at the Fairy Do-nothing's, ending in a miserable death. But his attention was soon after most alarmingly roused by hearing the giant Snap-'em-up again in conversation with his cook, who said that, if he wished for a good large dish of scalloped children at dinner, it would be necessary to catch a few more, as those he had already provided would scarcely be a mouthful. As the giant kept very fashionable hours, and always waited dinner for himself till 9 o'clock, there was still plenty of time, so, with a loud grumble about the trouble, he seized a large basket in his hand and set off at a rapid pace towards the Fairy Teach-all's garden. It was very seldom that Snap-'em-up ventured to think of foraging in this direction, as he never once succeeded in carrying off a single captive from the enclosure, it was so well fortified and so bravely defended. But on this occasion, being desperately hungry, he felt as bold as a lion, and walked with outstretched hands straight towards the Fairy Teach-all's dinner table, taking such prodigious strides that he seemed almost as if he would trample on himself. A cry of consternation arose the instant this tremendous giant appeared, and, as usual on such occasions, when he had made the same attempt before, a dreadful battle took place. 50 active little boys bravely flew upon the enemy, armed with their dinner knives, and looked like a nest of hornets, stinging him in every direction, till he roared with pain, and would have run away, but the Fairy Teach-all, seeing his intention, rushed forward with the carving knife, and brandishing it high over her head, she most courageously stabbed him to the heart. If a great mountain had fallen to the earth, it would have seemed like nothing in comparison with the giant Snap-'em-up, who crushed 2 or 3 houses to powder beneath him, and upset several fine monuments that were to have made people remembered for ever. But all this would have seemed scarcely worth mentioning, had it not been for a still greater event which occurred on the occasion, no less than the death of the Fairy Do-nothing, who had been indolently looking on at this great battle, without taking the trouble to interfere, or even to care who was victorious. But being also lazy about running away, when the giant fell, his sword came with so violent a stroke on her head that she instantly expired. Thus, luckily for the whole world, the Fairy Teach-all got possession of immense property, which she proceeded without delay to make the best use of in her power. In the first place, however, she lost no time in liberating Master No-book from his hook in the larder, and gave him a lecture on activity, moderation, and good conduct, which he never afterwards forgot, and it was astonishing to see the change that took place immediately in his whole thoughts and actions. From this very hour Master No-book became the most diligent, active, happy boy in the Fairy Teach-all's garden, and on returning home a month afterwards, he astonished all the masters at school by his extraordinary reformation. The most difficult lessons were a pleasure to him. He scarcely ever stirred without a book in his hand, never lay on a sofa again, would scarcely even sit on a chair with a back to it, but preferred a 3-legged stool, detested holidays, never thought any exertion a trouble, preferred climbing over the top of a hill to creeping round the bottom, always ate the plainest food in very small quantities, joined a temperance society, and never tasted a morsel till he had worked very hard and got an appetite. Not long after this, an old uncle, who had formerly been ashamed of Master No-book's indolence and gluttony, became so pleased at the wonderful change, that on his death he left him a magnificent estate, desiring that he should take his name. Therefore, instead of being any longer one of the No-book family, he is now called Sir Timothy Bluestocking, a pattern to the whole country around for the good he does to everyone, and especially for his extraordinary activity, appearing as if he could do 20 things at once. Though generally very good-natured and agreeable, Sir Timothy is occasionally observed in a violent passion, laying about him with his walking-stick in the most terrific manner, and beating little boys within an inch of their lives. But on inquiry it invariably appears that he has found them out to be lazy, idle, or greedy, for all the industrious boys in the parish are sent to get employment from him, while he assures them that they are far happier breaking stones on the road than if they were sitting idly in a drawing-room with nothing to do. End of Uncle David's nonsensical story about giants and fairies, by Catherine Sinclair. Recording by Lynn Thompson.
The Boy Who Wanted More Cheese by William Elliot Griffiths. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Tara Lynn Levine. Klaas van Vondel was a Dutch boy, 12 years old, who lived where cows were plentiful. He was over 5 feet high, weighed 100 pounds, and had rosy cheeks. His appetite was always good, and his mother declared his stomach had no bottom. His hair was of a color halfway between a carrot and a sweet potato. It was as thick as reeds in a swamp and was cut level, from under one ear to another. Klaas stood in a pair of timber shoes that made an awful rattle when he ran fast to catch a rabbit or scuffed slowly along to school over the brick road of his village. In summer, Klaas was dressed in a rough blue linen blouse. In winter, he wore woolen breeches as wide as coffee bags. They were called bell trousers, and in shape were like a couple of cowbells turned upwards. These were buttoned on to a thick, warm jacket. Until he was 5 years old, Klaas was dressed like his sisters. Then, on his birthday, he had boy's clothes, with 2 pockets in them, of which he was proud enough. Klaas was a farmer's boy. He had rye bread and fresh milk for breakfast. At dinner time, besides cheese and bread, he was given a plate heaped with boiled potatoes. Into these he first plunged a fork, and then dipped each round white ball into a bowl of hot melted butter. Very quickly then did potato and butter disappear down the red lane. At supper he had bread and skim milk, left after the cream had been taken off, with the saucer, to make butter. Twice a week the children enjoyed a bowl of bonneklapper, or curds, with a little brown sugar sprinkled on the top. But at every meal there was cheese, usually in thin slices, which the boy thought not thick enough. When Klaas went to bed, he usually fell asleep as soon as his shock of yellow hair touched the pillow. In summertime, he slept till the birds began to sing at dawn. In winter, when the bed felt warm and Jack Frost was lively, he often heard the cows talking in their way before he jumped out of his bag of straw, which served for a mattress. The Van Vondels were not rich, but everything was shining clean. There was always plenty to eat at the Van Vondels' house. Stacks of rye bread, a yard long and thicker than a man's arm, stood on end in the corner of the cool stone-lined basement. The loaves of dough were put in the oven once a week. Baking time was a great event at the Van Vondels, and no menfolks were allowed in the kitchen on that day, unless they were called in to help. As for the milk pails and pans, filled or emptied, scrubbed or set in the sun every day to dry, and the cheeses, piled up in the pantry, they seemed sometimes enough to feed a small army. But Klaas always wanted more cheese. In other ways he was a good boy, obedient at home, always ready to work on the cow farm, and diligent in school. But at the table he never had enough. Sometimes his father laughed and asked him if he had a well or a cave under his jacket. Klaas had 3 younger sisters, Trintje, Amaket, and Sartjit, which is Dutch for Kate, Annie, and Sally. These their fond mother, who loved them dearly, called her orange blossoms. But when at dinner Klaas would keep on, dipping his potatoes into the hot butter while others were all through, his mother would laugh and call him her buttercup. But always Klaas wanted more cheese. When unusually greedy, she twitted him as a boy worse than butter and eggs, that is, troublesome as the yellow and white plant called toadflax is to the farmer. Very pretty, but nothing but a weed. One summer's evening, after a good scolding, which he deserved well, Klaas moped, and almost crying, went to bed in bad humor. He had teased each one of his sisters to give him her bit of cheese, and this, added to his own slice, made his stomach feel as heavy as lead. Klaas's bed was up in the garret. When the house was first built, one of the red tiles of the roof had been taken out, and another one made of glass was put in its place. In the morning, this gave the boy light to put on his clothes. At night, in fair weather, it supplied air to his room. A gentle breeze was blowing from the pine woods on the sandy slope not far away. So Klaas climbed up on the stool to sniff the sweet piney odors. He thought he saw lights dancing under the tree. One beam seemed to approach his roof hole, and coming nearer played round the chimney. Then it passed to and fro in front of him. It seemed to whisper in his ear as it moved by. It looked very much as if 100 fireflies had united their cold light into one lamp. Then Klaas thought that the strange beams bore the shape of a lovely girl, but he only laughed at himself at the idea. Pretty soon, however, he thought the whisper became a voice. Again, he laughed so heartily that he forgot his moping and the scolding his mother had given him. In fact, his eyes twinkled with delight when the voice gave this invitation. "There's plenty of cheese. Come with us." To make sure of it, the sleepy boy now rubbed his eyes and cocked his ears. Again, the light-bearer spoke to him. "Come." Could it be? He had heard old people tell of the ladies of the wood that whispered and warned travelers. In fact, he himself had often seen the fairies ring in the pine woods. To this, the flame lady was inviting him. Again and again the moving cold light circled round the red tile roof, which the moon, then rising and peeping over the chimneys, seemed to turn into silver plates. As the disk rose higher in the sky, he could hardly see the moving light that had looked like a lady, but the voice, no longer a whisper, as at first, was now even plainer. "There's plenty of cheese. Come with us." "I'll see what it is anyhow," said Klaas, as he drew on his thick woolen stockings and prepared to go downstairs and out without waking a soul. At the door he stepped into his wooden shoes. Just then the cat purred and rubbed up against his shins. He jumped, for he was scared, but looking down for a moment, he saw the 2 balls of yellow fire in her head, and knew what they were. Then he sped to the pine woods and toward the fairy ring. What an odd sight! At first Klaas thought it was a circle of big fireflies. Then he saw clearly that there were dozens of pretty creatures, hardly as large as dolls, but as lively as crickets. They were as full of light as if lamps had wings. Hand in hand they flitted and danced around the ring of grass, as if this was fun. Hardly had Klaas got over his first surprise, then of a sudden he felt himself surrounded by the fairies. Some of the strongest among them had left the main party in the circle and come to him. He felt himself pulled by their dainty fingers. One of them, the loveliest of all, whispered in his ear, "Come, you must dance with us." Then a dozen of the pretty creatures murmured in chorus, "Plenty of cheese here, plenty of cheese here. Come, come." Upon this the heels of Klaas seemed as light as a feather. In a moment, with both hands clasped in those of the fairies, he was dancing in high glee. It was as much fun as if he were at the Comus, with a row of boys and girls, hand in hand, swinging along the streets, as Dutch maids and youth do during Comus week. Klaus had not time to look hard at the fairies, for he was too full of the fun. He danced and danced all night, and until the sky in the east began to turn, first gray and then rosy. Then he tumbled down, tired out, and fell asleep. His head lay on the inner curve of the fairy ring, with his feet in the center. Klaas felt very happy, for he had no sense of being tired, and he did not know he was asleep. He thought his fairy partners who had danced with him were now waiting on him to bring him cheeses. With a golden knife they sliced them off and fed him out of their own hands. How good it tasted! He thought now he could and would eat all the cheese he had longed for all his life. There was no mother to scold him or daddy to shake his finger at him. How delightful! But by and by he wanted to stop eating and rest a while. His jaws were tired. His stomach seemed to be loaded with cannonballs. He gasped for breath. But the fairies would not let him stop, for Dutch fairies never get tired. Flying out of the sky, from the north, south, east, and west they came, bringing cheeses. These they dropped down around him, until the piles of the round masses threatened first to enclose him, as if with a wall, and then to overtop him. There were the red balls from Edam, the pink and yellow spheres from Gouda, and the gray loaf-shaped ones from Leyden. Down through the vista of sand and the pine woods he looked, and oh, horrors! There were the tallest and strongest of the fairies, rolling along the huge, round, flat cheeses from Friesland. Any one of these was as big as a cartwheel, and would feed a regiment. The fairies trundled the heavy discs along as if they were playing with hoops. They shouted hilariously, as, with a pine stick, they beat them forward like boys at play. Farm cheese, factory cheese, Alkmaar cheese, and, to crown all, cheeses from Limburg, which Klaas could never bear because of its strong odor. Soon the cakes and balls were heaped so high around him that the boy, as he looked up, felt like a frog in a well. He groaned when he thought the high cheese walls were tottering to fall on him. Then he screamed, but the fairies thought he was making music. They, not being human, do not know how a boy feels. At last, with a thick slice in one hand and a big hunk in the other, he could eat no more cheese, though the fairies, led by their queen, standing on one side, hovering over his head, still urged him to take more. At this moment, while afraid that he would burst, Klaas saw the pile of cheeses, as big as a house, topple over. The heavy mass fell inwards upon him. With a scream of terror, he thought himself crushed as flat as a Friesland cheese. But he wasn't. Waking up and rubbing his eyes, he saw the red sun rising on the sand dunes. Birds were singing and the cocks were crowing all around him in chorus, as if saluting him. Just then, also the village clock chimed out the hour. He felt his clothes. They were wet with dew. He sat up to look around. There were no fairies, but in his mouth was a bunch of grass, which he had been chewing lustily. Klaas never would tell the story of his night with the fairies, nor has he yet settled the question, whether they left him because the cheese house of his dream had fallen, or because daylight had come. End of The Boy Who Wanted More Cheese by William Elliott Griffiths. Read by Tara Lynn Levine.
Busy Idleness by Jane Taylor. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Busy Idleness by Jane Taylor. Mrs. Dawson, being obliged to leave home for 6 weeks, her daughters Charlotte and Caroline received permission to employ the time of her absence as they pleased. That is, she did not require of them the usual strict attention to particular hours and particular studies, but allowed them to choose their own employments, only recommending them to make good use of the license, and apprising them that, on her return, she should require an exact account of the manner in which the interval had been employed. The carriage that conveyed their mother away was scarcely out of hearing, when Charlotte, delighted with her freedom, hastened upstairs to the schoolroom, where she looked around on books, globes, maps, drawings, to select some new employment for the morning. Long before she had decided upon any, her sister had quietly seated herself at her accustomed station, thinking that she could do nothing better than finish the French exercise she had begun the day before. Charlotte, however, declined attending to French that day, and after much indecision, and saying, "I have a great mind to," several times without finishing the sentence, she at last took down a volume of Cooper, and read in different parts for about half an hour. Then throwing it aside, she said she had a great mind to put the bookshelves in order, a business which she commenced with great spirit. But in the course of her laudable undertaking, she met with a manuscript in shorthand, whereupon she exclaimed to her sister, "Caroline, don't you remember that old Mr. Henderson once promised he would teach us shorthand? How much I should like to learn! Only mamma thought we had not time, but now this would be such a good opportunity. I am sure I could learn it well in 6 weeks, and how convenient it would be! One could take down sermons, or anything, and I could make Rachel learn, and then how very pleasant it would be to write to each other in shorthand. Indeed, it would be convenient in 100 ways." So saying, she ran upstairs without any further delay, and putting on her hat and spencer, set off to old Mr. Henderson's. Mr. Henderson happened to be at dinner. Nevertheless, Charlotte obtained admittance on the plea of urgent business, and she entered his apartment so much out of breath and in such apparent agitation that the old gentleman, rising hastily from the table, and looking anxiously at her over his spectacles, inquired in a tremulous tone what was the matter. When, therefore, Charlotte explained her business, he appeared a little disconcerted, but having gently reproved her for her undue eagerness, he composedly resumed his knife and fork, though his hand shook much more than usual during the remainder of his meal. However, being very good-natured, as soon as he had dined, he cheerfully gave Charlotte her first lesson in shorthand, promising to repeat it regularly every morning. Charlotte returned home in high glee. She at this juncture considered shorthand as one of the most useful, and decidedly the most interesting, of acquirements, and she continued to exercise herself in it all the rest of the day. She was exceedingly pleased at being able to write 2 or 3 words, which neither her sister nor even her father could decipher. For 3 successive mornings Charlotte punctually kept her appointment with Mr. Henderson, but on the 4th she sent a shabby excuse to her kind master. And if the truth must be told, he from that time saw no more of his scholar. Now the cause of this desertion was twofold. First, and principally, her zeal for shorthand, which for the last 48 hours had been sensibly declining in its temperature, was, on the above morning, within half a degree of freezing point. And, second, a new and far more arduous and important undertaking had by this time suggested itself to her mind. Like many young persons of desultory inclinations, Charlotte often amused herself with writing verses, and it now occurred to her that an abridged history of England in verse was still a desideratum in literature. She commenced this task with her usual diligence, but was somewhat discouraged in the outset by the difficulty of finding a rhyme to Saxon, whom she indulged the unpatriotic wish that the Danes had laid a tax on. But, though she got over this obstacle by a new construction of the line, she found these difficulties occur so continually that she soon felt a more thorough disgust at this employment than at the preceding one. So the epic stopped short, some 100 years before the Norman Conquest. Difficulty, which quickens the ardour of industry, always damps and generally extinguishes the false zeal of caprice and versatility. Charlotte's next undertaking was, to be sure, a rapid descent from the last in the scale of dignity. She now thought that, by working very hard during the remainder of the time, she should be able to accomplish a patchwork counterpane large enough for her own little tent bed. And the ease of this employment formed a most agreeable contrast in her mind with the extreme difficulty of the last. Accordingly, as if commissioned with a search warrant, she ransacked all her mother's drawers, bags, and bundles in quest of new pieces. And these spoils proving very insufficient, she set off to tax all her friends, and to tease all the linen drapers in the town for their odds and ends, urging that she wanted some particularly. As she was posting along the street on this business, she espied at a distance a person whom she had no wish to encounter, namely, old Mr. Henderson. To avoid the meeting she crossed over, but this manoeuvre did not succeed, for no sooner had they come opposite of each other than, to her great confusion, he called out across the street in his loud and tremulous voice, and shaking his stick at her, "How do you do, Miss Shorthand? I thought how it would be. Oh, fie! Oh, fie!" Charlotte hurried on, and her thoughts soon returned to the idea of the splendid radiating star which she designed for the centrepiece of her counterpane. While she was arranging the different patterns and forming the alternations of light and shade, her interest continued nearly unabated. But when she came to the practical part of sewing piece to piece with unvarying sameness, it began, as usual, to flag. She sighed several times and cast many disconsolate looks at the endless hexagons and octagons before she indulged any distinct idea of relinquishing her task. At length, however, it did forcibly occur to her that, after all, she was not obliged to go on with it, and that really patchwork was a thing that was better done by degrees, when one happens to want a job, rather than to be finished all at once. So with this thought, which would have been a very good one if it had occurred in proper time, she suddenly drew out her needle, thrust all her pieces arranged and unarranged into a drawer, and began to meditate a new project. Fortunately, just at this juncture some young ladies of their acquaintance called upon Charlotte and Caroline. They were attempting to establish a society among their young friends for working for the poor, and came to request their assistance. Caroline very cheerfully entered into the design, but as for Charlotte, nothing could exceed the forwardness of her zeal. She took it up so warmly that Caroline's appeared, in comparison, only lukewarm. It was proposed that each member of the society should have an equal proportion of the work to do at her own house, but when the articles came to be distributed, Charlotte, in the heat of her benevolence, desired that a double portion might be allotted to her. Some of the younger ones admired her industrious intentions, but the better judging advised her not to undertake too much at once. However, she would not be satisfied till her request was complied with. When the parcels of work arrived, Charlotte with exultation seized the larger one, and without a minute's delay commenced her charitable labours. The following morning she rose at 4 o'clock to resume the employment, and not a little self-complacency did she feel when, after nearly 2 hours' hard work, she still heard Caroline breathing in a sound sleep. But alas, Charlotte soon found that work is work of whatever nature, or for whatever purpose. She now inwardly regretted that she had asked for more than her share, and the cowardly thought that after all she was not obliged to do it next occurred to her. For the present, therefore, she squeezed all the things done and undone into what she called her Dorcas bag, and to banish unpleasant thoughts she opened the first book that happened to lie within reach. It proved to be an introduction to botany. Of this she had not read more than a page and a half before she determined to collect some specimens herself, and having found a blank copy-book, she hastened into the garden, where, gathering a few common flowers, she proceeded to dissect them, not, it is to be feared, with much scientific nicety. Perhaps as many as 3 pages of this copy-book would be spread with her specimens before she discovered that botany was a dry study. It would be too tedious to enumerate all the subsequent ephemeral undertakings which filled up the remainder of the 6 weeks. At the expiration of that time, Mrs. Dawson returned. On the next morning after her arrival, she reminded her daughters of the account she expected of their employments during her absence, and desired them to set out on 2 tables in the schoolroom everything they had done that could be exhibited, together with the books they had been reading. Charlotte would gladly have been excused her part of the exhibition, but this was not permitted, and she reluctantly followed her sister to make the preparation. When the 2 tables were spread, their mother was summoned to attend. Caroline's, which was first examined, contained first her various exercises in the different branches of study, regularly executed the same as usual, and there were papers placed in the books she was reading in school hours to show how far she had proceeded in them. Besides these, she had read in her leisure time in French Florian's Numa Pompilius, and in English Mrs. Moore's Practical Piety, and some part of Johnson's Lives of the Poets. All the needlework which had been left to do or not at her option was neatly finished, and her parcel of linen for the poor was also completely and well done. The only instance in which Caroline had availed herself of her mother's license was that she had prolonged her drawing lessons a little every day, in order to present her mother with a pretty pair of screens with flowers copied from nature. These were, last of all, placed on the table with an affectionate note requesting her acceptance of them. Mrs. Dawson, having carefully examined this table, proceeded to the other, which was quite piled up with different articles. Here, amid the heap, were Charlotte's 3 pages of shorthand, several scraps of paper containing fragments of her poetical history, a piece, not large enough for a doll's cradle, of her patchwork counterpane, her botanical specimens, together with a large unfinished pile out of the Dorcas bag, many of the articles of which were begun, but not quite finished. There was a baby's cap with no border, a frock body without sleeves, and the skirt only half hemmed at the bottom, and slides, tapes, and buttonholes were all, without exception, omitted. After these followed a vast variety of thirds, halves, and quarters of undertakings, each perhaps good in itself, but quite useless in its unfinished state. The examination being at length ended, Mrs. Dawson retired without a single comment to her dressing-room, where, in about an hour afterwards, she summoned the girls to attend her. Here also were 2 tables laid out, with several articles on each. Their mother, then leading Caroline to the first, told her that, as the reward of her industry and perseverance, the contents of the table were her own. Here, with joyful surprise, she beheld first a little gold watch, which Mrs. Dawson said she thought a suitable present for one who had made good use of her time. A small telescope next appeared, and lastly Paley's Natural Theology, neatly bound. Charlotte was then desired to take possession of the contents of the other table, which were considerably more numerous. The first prize she drew out was a very beautiful French fan, but on opening it, it stretched out in an oblong shape, for want of the pin to confine the sticks at the bottom. Then followed a new parasol, but when unfurled there was no catch to confine it, so that it would not remain spread. A penknife handle without a blade, and the blade without the handle next presented themselves to her astonished gaze. In great confusion she then unrolled a paper which discovered a telescope apparently like her sister's, but on applying it to her eye she found it did not contain a single lens, so that it was no better than a roll of pasteboard. She was, however, greatly encouraged to discover that the last remaining article was a watch, for, as she heard it tick, she felt no doubt that this at least was complete. But on examination she discovered that there was no hour hand, the minute hand alone pursuing its lonely and useless track. Charlotte, whose conscience had very soon explained to her the moral of all this, now turned from the tantalizing table in confusion, and burst into an agony of tears. Caroline wept also, and Mrs. Dawson, after an interval of silence, thus addressed her daughters. "It is quite needless for me to explain my reasons for making you such presents, Charlotte. I assure you your papa and I have had a very painful employment the past hour in spoiling them all for you. If I had found on your table in the schoolroom any one thing that had been properly finished, you would have received one complete present to answer it. But this, you know, was not the case. I should be very glad if this disappointment should teach you what I have hitherto vainly endeavoured to impress upon you, that as all those things, pretty or useful as they are in themselves, are rendered totally useless for want of completeness, so exertion without perseverance is no better than busy idleness. That employment does not deserve the name of industry, which requires a stimulus of novelty to keep it going. Those who will only work so long as they are amused will do no more good in the world, either to themselves or others, than those who refuse to work at all. If I had required you to pass the 6 weeks of my absence in bed, or in counting your fingers, you would, I suppose, have thought it a sad waste of time, and yet I appeal to you whether, with the exception of an hour or 2 of needlework, the whole mass of articles on your table could produce anything more useful. And thus, my dears, may life be squandered away in a succession of busy nothings. I have now a proposal to make to you. These presents, which you are to take possession of as they are, I advise you to lay by carefully. Whenever you can show me anything that you have begun and voluntarily finished, you may at the same time bring with you one of these things, beginning with those of least value, to which I will immediately add the part that is deficient. Thus, by degrees, you may have them all completed. And if by this means you should acquire the wise and virtuous habit of perseverance, it will be far more valuable to you than the richest present you could possibly receive. End of Busy Idleness by Jane Taylor. Read by Lynn Thompson. The Purple Jar by Maria Edgeworth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Purple Jar by Maria Edgeworth. Rosamond, a little girl about 7 years old, was walking with her mother in the streets of London. As she passed along, she looked in at the windows of several shops, and saw a great variety of different sorts of things, of which she did not know the use, or even the names. She wished to stop and look at them, but there was a great number of people in the street, and a great many carts, carriages, and wheelbarrows, and she was afraid to let go of her mother's hand. "Oh, mother, how happy I should be," she said, as she passed a toy shop, "if I had all these pretty things." "What, all? Do you wish for them all, Rosamond?" "Yes, mamma, all." As she spoke, they came to a milliner's shop, the windows of which were decorated with ribbons and lace and festoons of artificial flowers. "Oh, mamma, what beautiful roses! Won't you buy some of them?" "No, my dear." "Why?" "Because I don't want them, my dear." Then they went a little farther, and came to another shop which caught Rosamond's eye. It was a jeweller's shop, and in it were a great many pretty baubles, ranged in drawers behind glass. "Mamma, will you buy some of these?" "Which of them, Rosamond?" "Which? I don't know which. Any of them will do, for they are all pretty." "Yes, they are all pretty, but of what use would they be to me?" "Use? Oh, I'm sure you could find some use or other for them if you would only buy them first." "But I would rather find out the use first." "Well then, mamma, there are buckles. You know that buckles are useful things, very useful things." "I have a pair of buckles. I don't want another pair," said her mother, and walked on. Rosamond was very sorry that her mother wanted nothing. Presently, however, they came to a shop which appeared to her far more beautiful than the rest. It was a chemist's shop, but she did not know that. "Oh, mother, oh!" cried she, pulling her mother's hand. "Look, look! Blue, green, red, yellow, and purple. Oh, mamma, what beautiful things! Won't you buy some of these?" Still her mother answered as before. "Of what use would they be to me, Rosamond?" "You might put flowers in them, mamma, and they would look so pretty on the chimney-piece. I wish I had one of them." "You have a flower-pot," said her mother, "and that is not a flower-pot." "But I could use it for a flower-pot, mamma, you know." "Perhaps if you were to see it nearer, if you were to examine it, you might be disappointed." "No, indeed, I'm sure I should not. I should like it exceedingly." Rosamond kept her head turned to look at the purple vase, till she could see it no longer. "Then, mother," said she, after a pause, "perhaps you have no money." "Yes, I have." "Dear me, if I had money I would buy roses and boxes and buckles and purple flower-pots and everything." Rosamond was obliged to pause in the midst of her speech. "Oh, mamma, would you stop a minute for me? I've got a stone in my shoe. It hurts me very much." "How came there to be a stone in your shoe?" "Because of this great hole, mamma. It comes in there. My shoes are quite worn out. I wish you would be so very good as to give me another pair." "Nay, Rosamond, but I have not money enough to buy shoes, and flower-pots, and buckles, and boxes, and everything." Rosamond thought that was a great pity, but now her foot, which had been hurt by the stone, began to give her so much pain that she was obliged to hop every other step, and she could think of nothing else. They came to a shoemaker's shop soon afterwards. "There, there, mamma, there are shoes. There are little shoes that will just fit me, and you know shoes would be really of use to me." "Yes, so they would, Rosamond. Come in." She followed her mother into the shop. Mr. Sole, the shoemaker, had a great many customers, and his shop was full, so they were obliged to wait. "Well, Rosamond," said her mother, "you don't think this shop so pretty as the rest?" "No, not nearly. It is black and dark, and there are nothing but shoes all round, and besides, there's a very disagreeable smell." "That smell is the smell of new leather." "Is it? Oh," said Rosamond, looking round. "There is a little pair of shoes. They'll just fit me, I'm sure." "Perhaps they might, but you cannot be sure till you have tried them on, any more than you can be quite sure that you should like the purple vase exceedingly till you have examined it more attentively." "Why, I don't know about the shoes, certainly, till I have tried, but, mamma, I am quite sure that I should like the flower pot." "Well, which would you rather have, a jar or a pair of shoes? I will buy either for you." "Dear mamma, thank you. But if you could buy both?" "No, not both." "Then the jar, if you please." "But I should tell you that in that case I shall not give you another pair of shoes this month." "This month? That's a very long time indeed. You can't think how these hurt me. I believe I'd better have the new shoes. Yet that purple flower pot. Oh, indeed, mamma, these shoes are not so very, very bad. I think I might wear them a little longer, and the month will soon be over. I can make them last till the end of the month, can't I? Don't you think so, mamma?" "Nay, my dear, I want you to think for yourself. You will have time enough to consider the matter while I speak to Mr. Sole about my clogs." Mr. Sole was by this time at leisure, and while her mother was speaking to him, Rosamond stood in profound meditation, with one shoe on and the other in her hand. "Well, my dear, have you decided?" "Mamma, yes, I believe I have. If you please, I should like to have the flower pot. That is, if you won't think me very silly, mamma." "Why, as to that, I can't promise you, Rosamond, but when you have to judge for yourself, you should choose what would make you happy, and then it would not signify who thought you silly." "Then, mamma, if that's all, I'm sure the flower pot would make me happy," said she, putting on her old shoe again. "So I choose the flower pot." "Very well, you shall have it. Clasp your shoe and come home." Rosamond clasped her shoe and ran after her mother. It was not long before the shoe came down at the heel, and many times she was obliged to stop and take the stones out of it, and she often limped with pain, but still the thoughts of the purple flower pot prevailed, and she persisted in her choice. When they came to the shop with the large window, Rosamond felt much pleasure upon hearing her mother desire the servant, who was with them, to buy the purple jar, and bring it home. He had other commissions, so he did not return with them. Rosamond, as soon as she got in, ran to gather all her own flowers, which she kept in a corner of her mother's garden. "I am afraid they'll be dead before the flower pot comes, Rosamond," said her mother to her, as she came in with the flowers in her lap. "No, indeed, mamma, it will come home very soon, I dare say. I shall be very happy putting them into the purple flower pot." "I hope so, my dear." The servant was much longer returning home than Rosamond had expected, but at length he came, and brought with him the long-wished-for jar. The moment it was set down upon the table, Rosamond ran up to it with an exclamation of joy. "I may have it now, mamma?" "Yes, my dear, it is yours." Rosamond poured the flowers from her lap upon the carpet, and seized the purple flower pot. "Oh dear, mother," cried she, as soon as she had taken off the top, "but there's something dark in it which smells very disagreeably. What is it? I didn't want this black stuff." "Nor I, my dear." "But what shall I do with it, mamma?" "That I cannot tell." "It will be of no use to me, mamma." "That I cannot help." "But I must pour it out and fill the flower pot with water." "As you please, my dear." "Will you lend me a bowl to pour it into, mamma?" "That was more than I promised you, my dear, but I will lend you a bowl." The bowl was produced, and Rosamond proceeded to empty the purple vase. but she experienced much surprise and disappointment on finding, when it was entirely empty, that it was no longer a purple vase. It was a plain white glass jar, which had appeared to have the beautiful colour merely from the liquor with which it had been filled. Little Rosamond burst into tears. "Why should you cry, my dear?" said her mother. "It will be of as much use to you now as ever for a flower pot. But it won't look so pretty on the chimney piece. I'm sure if I had known that it was not really purple, I should not have wished to have it so much. But didn't I tell you that you had not examined it, and that perhaps you would be disappointed?" "And so I am disappointed indeed. I wish I had believed you at once. Now I had much rather have the shoes, for I shall not be able to walk all this month. Even walking home that little way hurt me exceedingly. Mamma, I will give you the flower pot back again, and that purple stuff and all, if you'll only give me the shoes." "No, Rosamond, you must abide by your own choice. And now the best thing you can possibly do is to bear your disappointment with good humour." "I will bear it as well as I can," said Rosamond, wiping her eyes, and she began slowly and sorrowfully to fill the vase with flowers. But Rosamond's disappointment did not end there. Many were the difficulties and distresses into which her imprudent choice brought her before the end of the month. Every day her shoes grew worse and worse, till at last she could neither run, dance, jump, nor walk in them. Whenever Rosamond was called to see anything, she was detained pulling her shoes up at the heels, and was sure to be too late. Whenever her mother was going out to walk, she could not take Rosamond with her, for Rosamond had no soles on her shoes, and at length, on the very last day of the month, it happened that her father proposed to take her with her brother to the glass house, which she had long wished to see. She was very happy, but when she was quite ready, had her hat and gloves on, and was making haste downstairs to her brother and father, who were waiting for her at the hall door, the shoe dropped off. She put it on again in a great hurry, but as she was going across the hall, her father turned round. "Why are you walking slipshod?" "No one must walk slipshod with me. Why, Rosamond," said he, looking at her shoes with disgust, "I thought that you were always neat. No, I cannot take you with me." Rosamond coloured and retired. "Oh, mamma," said she, as she took off her hat, "how I wish that I had chosen the shoes! They would have been of so much more use to me than that jar. However, I am sure, no, not quite sure, but I hope I shall be wiser another time." End of The Purple Jar, by Maria Edgeworth. Read by Lynn Thompson.
Writing a Book by Miss W. K. Clifford. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Ethel Buss. "A fairy story," said the elder sister. "A book about kings and queens," said the other. "Oh, no," said the brother. "Let's write about animals." "We will write about them all," they cried together. So they put the paper and pens and ink ready. The elder sister took up a fairy story and looked at it and put it down again. "I have never known any fairies," she said, "except in books. But, of course, it would not do to put one book inside another. Anyone could do that." "I shall not begin today," the little one said, "for I must know a few kings and queens before I write about them, or I may say something foolish." "I shall write about the pig and the pony and the white rabbit," said the brother. "But first I must think a bit. It would never do to write a book without thinking." Then the elder sister took up the fairy story again, to see how many things were left out, for those, she thought, would do to go into her book. The little one said to herself, Really, it's no good thinking about kings and queens until I have known some. So I must wait. And while the brother was considering about the pig and the pony and the white rabbit, he fell asleep. So the book is not written yet, but when it is, we shall know a great deal. End of writing a book by Miss W. K. Clifford.
Cloud Eating by James A. Honey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Cloud Eating by James A. Honey. From South African Folk Tales. Jackal and hyena were together, it is said, when a white cloud rose. Jackal descended upon it and ate of the cloud as if it were fat. When he wanted to come down, he said to Hyena, "My sister, as I am going to divide with thee, catch me well." So she caught him, and broke his fall. Then she also went up and ate there, high up on the top of the cloud. When she was satisfied, she said, "My grayish brother, now catch me well." The grayish rogue said to his friend, "My sister, I shall catch thee well. Come therefore down." He held up his hands, and she came down from the cloud, and when she was near, Jackal cried out, painfully jumping to one side, "My sister, do not take it ill. Oh me, a thorn has pricked me and sticks in me." Thus she fell down from above, and was sadly hurt. Since that day it is said that Hyena's hind feet have been shorter and smaller than the front ones. End of Cloud Eating by James A. Honey.
The Broken Horse by Miss W. K. Clifford. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Itel Bus. They were all very sad, and the girl in the pink frock was crying bitterly, for they had been to the woods, and on the way home the wooden horse had fallen over one side and broken off his head. "Don't cry so! Pray don't cry so!" the little one said, as she knelt down in front of her sister and tried to kiss her. "And oh, sister," said the brother, "it would have been far worse if he had lost his tail too. Besides, perhaps he does not mind much. It's not as if he were alive." "Ah, yes," sobbed the tall girl, "but when you are as old as I am, you will know that it is a terrible thing to lose your head, even if it is only wooden." End of The Broken Horse by Miss W. K. Clifford.
The Two Little Cooks by Laura E. Richards. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tribal Elder. The Two Little Cooks by Laura E. Richards. There was once a little he-cook, the prettiest little he-cook that was ever seen. His eyes were as dark as blackcurrants, and his cheeks were as pink as the cochineal he put in his best frosting, and his skin was as white as the finest pastry flour. As for his hair, it was exactly the colour of barley sugar, and I hope you know what a pleasant colour that is. He wore a snowy cap and apron, and always had a long wooden spoon hanging from his girdle. He was the very best cook that ever lived, for he never cooked anything that was not good. Jam, all kinds, and little round plum cakes with pink and white frosting, and kisses, and lemon pie, and floating island, and wine jelly, and strawberry cream, and dear little three-cornered raspberry tarts, and oranges cut into baskets and filled with whipped cream. Oh, there was no end to the good things this little he-cook used to make. He made doughnuts too, and what do you think? One day when he was making doughnuts, he happened to look out of the window, and he saw, walking by, a little she-cook as pretty as a pink rose, and with a cap and apron just exactly like his. So the little he-cook ran to the door and said, "Pretty little she-cook, won't you come in?" And the pretty little she-cook said, "Thank you kindly, sir." So she came in, and he made her sit down on the dresser, and then he bought her some mulligatawny soup in a little china bowl, with the cover all painted with butterflies, 3 oyster patties, the best you ever saw, a fat little quail on toast, with mashed potatoes and gravy, a minced turnover and a lemon tart, a glass of orange jelly, a saucer of ice cream, and lots of macaroons. And when the little she-cook had eaten all these things, the little he-cook said to her, "Can you cook as well as that?" "Just as well, but no better," answered the little she-cook. "Was there anything that could have been done better?" he asked. "Yes, the piece of toast under the quail was darker on one side than the other." "You are right," said the little he-cook. "None but a first-class cook would have observed it. Will you marry me? We will cook together, and I feel sure we shall be happy." "That I will, with all my heart," said the little she-cook. "But who will marry us?" Just at that minute, who should come by but a fat priest to buy a 3-cornered raspberry tart. "If you will marry me to this little she-cook," said the little he-cook, "you shall have the tart for nothing." "That will I, with all my heart," said the fat priest. "But where is the ring to marry you with?" Then the little he-cook turned round and round and round 3 times, thinking what he should do, for he had no ring. After the 3rd turn, his eye fell upon the doughnuts that he had been making, and then he knew what to do. He made a little ball of dough, and then he patted it flat, and then he took the little she-cook's finger and poked it right through the middle of a doughnut, and then he dropped the doughnut into the frying pan. And when it was done, it was the most beautiful gold-brown colour that ever was seen. And as soon as it was cool, the little he-cook put it on the little she-cook's finger, which, of course, it fitted perfectly, and the fat priest married the two. And they filled his hat with doughnuts, and his pockets with buns and cocoa-nut cakes, and that was a very good day for the fat priest. And the little he-cook and the little she-cook lived together in perfect happiness ever afterward, both stirring the soup at once, and never quarrelling, and they always made hole in their doughnuts in remembrance of their wedding day, and so everyone else has made them ever since. End of The 2 Little Cooks by Laura E. Richards. Read by Tribal Elder.
The Lost Message by James A. Honey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jennifer Rudders. The Lost Message by James A. Honey from South African Folktales. The ant has had from time immemorial many enemies, and because he is small and destructive, there have been a great many slaughters among them. Not only were most of the birds their enemies, but Ant-eater lived almost wholly from them, and Centipede beset them every time and at all places when he had the chance. So now there were a few among them who thought it would be well to hold counsel together, and see if they could not come to some arrangement, whereby they could retreat to some place of safety when attacked by robber birds and animals. But at the gathering their opinions were most discordant, and they could come to no decision. There was red ant, rice ant, black ant, wagtail ant, gray ant, shining ant, and many other varieties. The decision was a true babel of diversity, which continued for a long time, and came to nothing. A part desired that they should all go into a small hole in the ground, and live there. Another part wanted to have a large and strong dwelling built on the ground, where nobody could enter but an ant. Still another wanted to dwell in trees, so as to get rid of Anteater, forgetting entirely that there would be the prey of birds. Another part seemed inclined to have wings and fly. And has already been said, this deliberation amounted to nothing, and each party resolved to go to work in its own way and on its own responsibility. Greater unity than that which existed in each separate faction could be seen nowhere in the world. Each had his appointed task, each did his work regularly and well, and all worked together in the same way. From among them they chose a king, that is to say, some of the groups did, and they divided the labor so that all went as smoothly as it possibly could. But each group did it in its own way, and not one of them thought of protecting themselves against the onslaught of birds or anteater. The red ants built their house on the ground and lived under it, but Anteater leveled to the ground in a minute, which had cost them many days of precious labor. The rice ants lived under the ground, and with them it went no better, for whenever they came out, Anteater visited them and took them out sack and pack. The wagtail ants fled to the trees, but there on many occasions sat Centipede waiting for them, or the birds gobbled them up. The gray ants had intended to save themselves from extermination by taking to flight, but this also availed them nothing, because the lizard, the hunting spider, and the birds went a great deal faster than they. When the insect king heard that they could come to no agreement, he sent them the secret of unity, the message of work together. But unfortunately, he chose for his messenger the beetle, and he has never yet arrived at the ants, so that they are still today the embodiment of discord, and consequently the prey of enemies. End of The Lost Message by James A. Honey. Read by Jennifer Rudders.